Welcome to a very spooky episode of Book Lounge by Libby. I'm Joe, and I am so happy you're here. This is the place where book lovers, authors, and industry insiders come together to talk about the stories we love and the impact they have. Now, before we dive in, don't forget to follow the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you do your listening, and subscribe to the Libby App YouTube channel so you never miss an episode. Yes, that includes full video episodes on the Libby App YouTube channel. You can also check out full video episodes on Spotify. If you love what we're doing, consider leaving a 5-star review or commenting on the YouTube channel. These engagements really help more folks find the show, and I truly appreciate it. Okay, podcaster things out of the way. If you couldn't tell from the voice I did at the beginning, or the set deck, or the title of the episode, I'm sure we'll also give it away. Today we're talking about one of my favorite things. It's a genre that I feel like I have finally discovered and embraced over the last 3+ years of doing the podcast. It's horror. And it's Halloween season, so what better time for creepy stories, campy classics, and so much more. So get ready for a chilling conversation about the genre and stick around where your favorite book ghouls recommend horror reads to haunt your TBR. First up in segment 1, I am joined by two of my absolute favorite authors in the space. They have both been on the previous incarnation of the show, and they are both auto-borrow authors for me in Libby. Today, we have Rachel Harrison and Ryan LaSala. Rachel Harrison is the New York Times bestselling author of Play Nice, So Thirsty, Black Sheep, Such Sharp Teeth, Cackle, and The Return, which was nominated for a Bram Stoker Award for Superior Achievement in a First Novel. You can find her short story fiction debut in her collection, Bad Dolls. And Ryan LaSala is the best-selling and award-winning author known for his genre-defying, queer-centered horror and fantasy. He is the author behind the best-selling cottagecore horror, The Honeys, in development with anonymous content, and is the author of Beholder, Reverie, and Bedazzled, and of course his 5th book, The Dead of Summer, released September 2025. Set your potions to simmer, grab your spell books, and let's turn the page and dive on in. Well, Rachel, Ryan, thank you both so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thank you. Excited to see you.
I'm excited to see you too. I'm beyond honored to have you both here, but also I want to say you're both return guests, but it also feels weird since we have a different name now. And, but hey, welcome back. Welcome to the new wing of the building, I guess. So, just to dive in, horror can mean so many different things: psychological, supernatural, slasher, camp. When you think about your work, what kind of horror do you most gravitate toward? And I'll let the alphabet be my guide, Rachel. I'm going to ask you to start first. Although I saw the fear when I said that, so unless you'd like Ryan to start.
No, I think I have strong feelings about this. I think and I'd be curious, Ryan, what your reaction is, but I sort of don't like to, for my own work, to put myself in a box. And I get a little sensitive when I feel like everyone likes to try and put me in a box. And I'm like, or I feel like, I think horror has been traditionally, cis dude, like genre.
Absolutely.
And so I think coming in and writing stories about women and kind of unapologetically so, I get a little bit sensitive when people say, oh, this is cozy horror or feminist horror or pink horror, which I don't disagree with necessarily, but I feel very strongly that I write horror, capital H, horror. And so, I think I think what's so beautiful about the genre is it can be so many different things. But and I feel this way for readers as well, where, I don't want a reader to come in and be like, well, I don't really like horror. I only like, cozy horror. It's like cozy horror is horror. So I feel the genre is in a really interesting place right now where I think it's expanding. And I get a little bit sensitive because I want it to expand and I want it to feel inclusive and be the different things that it is. So, yeah, when you asked that question, I was just a little bit like, oh, it's a sensitive subject for me. So I have to like come out and try and think of something articulate to say about it. And it's hard when you have big feelings about something. I think it's hard to put it into like sentences that.
Well, yeah, and I mean, your writing absolutely. You show that like every book is a different side of horror. Horror is just capital H horror. It is a monolith made up of many things. You can't put any piece into a box. And Ryan, looking at you, I'm going to ask you the same thing, of course, but also like the same thing with your work, going from The Honeys to Beholder to The Dead of Summer. Like everything moves in different ways and has a different take on something. But do you have what are your thoughts on kind of gravitation, what horror means to you, what it means to the space?
I love horror because, like, it more so designates a sensation or a reaction than it does
Mm.
the actual, like, content. Because how you achieve that is going to be totally up to you. And also, what I find
Mm.
horrifying might be so commonplace to somebody else, and vice versa. I've made a whole career out of taking beautiful, lovely things and making them terrifying. And those same tools in someone else's hands might yield a totally different book, but I'm trying to scare you. I'm trying to disrupt your assumptions about beauty and loveliness and safety and sanctuary specifically in my last book. I love horror because it can comprise so many different things. You can have moments of science fiction, just like right alongside moments of whimsy and fantasy in sort of the same book, so long as it's bent towards, kind of that disruption, at least for me. And so I kind of have to agree. I don't tend to whittle or winnow my way into anything too specific, but when you're marketing a book, you kind of have to engage with the tropification and the categorization that readers have basically had to learn in order to find books in a completely like digital catalog, right?
Yeah.
Algorithms, I feel like, have trained us to classify ourselves in really specific ways. But that by definition is a limit. And I feel like I definitely chafe against these limits because I have a really hard time talking about like the types of books that I write in a way that will make sense to readers. And so many of my readers also, when they're recommending my books to one another, their recommendations sound like, I don't want to tell you anything about this. I just want you to dive right in and experience it, like, for the first time, which just like it makes it hard to make recommendations. And
Mhm.
so I go with horror as well with a capital H. Recently I've had to kind of pick up the names of like eco horror or like eco thriller for my last book because of the nature of the organism in it. But even so, like if I was sort of in a quiet room with other writers, I don't know that I would describe it that way.
Right. I think it's so fascinating how book talk, how marketing by publishing, how all of this has taught us a lot of how to find what we like. And I think it speaks to the promise of like, there is hope that representation is getting better, that access to the books we need, the books we want to see, the reflections and representations we want in ourselves are out there. But then this like learning how to find them, we somehow get stuck back in the minds of like, okay, well, I have to put you in a neat little box so someone else can find you.
Yeah.
But also to your point of, oh, I don't want to tell you about it. I just want you to experience it. I think this week alone, I have texts in my phone about both of you that, that say the same thing. Rachel, I got my best friend to read Black Sheep just this past week. And she was talking about the very beginning of it. And she's like, I'm trying to believe this isn't what's going to happen. And I'm like, I simply cannot tell you. You just must sit back and enjoy it. And Beholder, yeah, I can't say anything about that. Like, I can't say anything.
Trust me, after like 2 years, I still have not found a way to describe that book to people.
I
So,
don't know how you did it at any point. I mean, it's beautiful, but good luck. To go back to the beginning, though, do you both have a moment that jumps out where you went, this is where I want to explore my craft? Like, this is the direction I'm going, what was kind of the spark that got you into a lot of what you're writing recently?
You went first last time, Rachel. Would you like me to?
Yeah.
Sure. I always will defer to the other panelists, by the way, because I
Okay.
talk a lot. So you just call on me. I'll talk.
My
Got it.
brain is soup right now. I like finished my tour, so I'm just like I want to hear the articulate person so that I can be like, let you go first, and then we'll have me be like,
I got you
"Bleh."
both on like travel days.
It's true. Oh my God.
Ryan's
Yeah.
in a hotel. Rachel's finally back at the end. I'm the monster in
No,
this
no, no.
story.
No, it's good. It's good. It's nice. I don't know how professional I'm gonna
And
sound
that's
about
okay.
this, but I'm gonna do my best.
We took that word out of the title. It's just book lounge now. So you can be
Oh
you
yeah,
can
we're
be super chill.
lounging. We're
Yeah, we're
lounging.
lounging. Get
I should
comfy.
be in like a bathrobe. What am I doing?
Yeah,
Ugh.
go for it. No nerds, no professionals.
Good. Okay. I can mark very specifically when I sort of made the transition to horror. It was out of a moment of like personal grief in my own life. And I wanted to write through it. Like I wanted to kind of find the words just for myself. My sister passed away very abruptly, and I was not really able to deal with it in the moment that it was happening because that's often just the nature of dealing with a crisis. And it was like years later that I sort of found an idea that was suddenly the right container for a lot of the grief that I had that was very unresolved from that. And so but I needed to find the words then to kind of talk through it as a teenage character, which meant that I had to talk to myself. And I couldn't do that in like fantasy, which I had been writing. The last book I had written before that was a rom-com about cosplay. So certainly I wasn't going to be picking up that, that plot line. And horror was sort of the only thing that I could sort of pick up and look into that felt like it would be able to kind of like sustain the weight of what I was dealing with. And I felt very lucky that I kind of had like some background in scary things. I've always been like a horror lover. I've always loved the experience of being the youngest in my family with cousins way older than me showing me horrific things that I definitely should not be looking at. Being in a movie theater full of people screaming no at like some bimbo as she runs away, right? Like I love those experiences and sort of the camaraderie that comes out of that. And so partly I was trying to kind of talk to myself with The Honeys is the book that I'm talking about, but also I wanted to recruit people into sort of this moment in my particular life through Mars's character. And then I've sort of stuck with that. I think a lot of my books have to do with grief or the continuum of grief. Like The Honeys is very much like the grief that happens right as someone passes and sort of the wake of that. And then Beholder is about how grief can sort of reverberate through your life years and years and years later and sort of shape the kind of future you get to have. And then The Dead of Summer is sort of a continuation where it's actually about grief for something that hasn't even happened yet. It's about anticipatory grief, the idea that all good things must come to an end. So how do we even let ourselves enjoy the present? Um, so yeah, it has a lot to do with just a lot of feelings, and I end up writing them down.
But hey, good therapy. I mean,
Truly.
putting it out there, and especially for the YA space to show that, like, hey, we need to process that, like, yes, grief is at the center of this, but also seeing the characters process grief, teaching that, like, yeah, let's work through this. Let's know we're not alone. Rachel, what about you? How did you come to this space for magic?
So I'm kind of the opposite. Always thought I didn't like horror because I am very easily frightened. And so to call myself out as a millennial, when I was very young, like even like walking into like a blockbuster and seeing the VHS cover of like a horror movie would terrify me for weeks. And so I was always because it made me feel so much and I reacted so strongly to it. I was like, this is something I don't like and it's not for me. I can't handle it. And I would still like bump up against like I would read Shirley Jackson and I was always obsessed with the Twilight Zone, but like in terms of horror, I like was like, oh, I don't really like it. And then in college, I had a roommate who was super into horror and like one snowy weekend was like, we're watching The Shining, both Kubrick's version and the miniseries, and like
Whoa.
really sort of
Yikes.
Yeah. We couldn't leave because we were snowed in, so we had no choice. Um, but she started getting me into it more, and then, I was a screenwriting major, and, there was a contest, and it was a horror writing contest, and so, I started, like, really immersing myself in the genre, and this roommate showed me, the film The Orphanage, which is a Spanish horror film, J. Bayona, and it was so scary, I had a panic attack halfway through and had to stop watching, and then I, like, woke up the next morning being like, "I need to know what happens," and
Mhm.
that was what I describe as my, like, "I love Josh" moment, which I'm referencing a lot, but you know Clueless? Where she's in
Yes.
front of the fountain and she's like, "I love
Oh
Josh."
my god.
Like, that was my "I love Josh" moment where I was like, "Oh, like, it's a good thing that it makes me feel this so much," and, that movie sort of, like, just really impacted me in the way that I could see how powerful storytelling through the genre was. Um, and that was like the moment that I sort of came to it. And then I started writing a lot of horror and speculative stuff. And yeah, here we are.
Did that experience, is that what led to The Return?
So it was
Or
like
kind of short stories first and
short
then
stories first. So I
okay.
wrote The Return.
'Cause your reaction to that movie was my reaction to The Return.
The Yeah, The Return came about later. So
Mhm.
um that was in college. So it was probably not a decade later, but, like, throughout my 20s, I wrote, like, speculative short fiction, and then the first horror novel I wrote was The Return, but The Return is about college friends, so
It all
it
fits
all fits
together.
together, yeah.
It is so interesting when you kind of, like, look at this. The thing here is catharsis, but also moving away from thinking of horror, like, this is the part that I like, this is the part to clip and post on social, to move away from the idea that, like, horror is just slasher, horror is just whatever. It's the, like, this is an opportunity to actually dissect what we're feeling, what we're experiencing. It's the, like, kill the part of you that cringes kind of thing. That's what horror leads back to, it feels like. Now, did either of you have scary books that jump out or movies that you're like, this is the one, Rachel? Of course, you just shared the movie that made you go like, oh, I get it now. Did either of you have a horror relationship with literature?
No, I don't think that I did. I think I was a okay. I am not a good reader. Like I've never been great at it.
I get it.
Yeah, and I was in, like, remedial reading all, like, growing up, and, but I was a good storyteller, so I could sort of, like, BS my way through, like, English classes and stuff. So I feel I used to sort of say that with, like, a lot of regret, although it has now led to kind of, like, a very fun renaissance as an adult of exploring all the things that were just a little too challenging for me when I was probably supposed to be reading them. But as a result, I don't have, like, a very robust bibliography, although, like, what I ended up reading a lot of, was, like, comic books and manga, just because like, the pictures made it a lot easier and more engaging for me, and so a lot of, like there's a great tradition of, like, horror manga
Oh,
that
yeah.
is, like, totally graphic and, like, no kid should be, like, sitting reading this, except, like, I was sat at, like, a Barnes& and Noble, like, tearing through these, um, and that's where, like, my mind goes to when I think of, like, formative, like, horrific literature, although I don't know that people would necessarily agree.
I mean, I would because I was sitting in the borders with the manga of The Ring. So
Yeah,
I get
yes.
it.
Oh my god, yeah, incredible.
This is why every time a TikTok of yours comes up on my For You page, I'm like, well, Ryan, I've been seen again. Yes, Sailor Moon did impact my life. Yes. Okay. He got me again. Here we go. But that makes sense.
R.I.P. Borders.
I
I
know.
will, whenever given the chance, I will speak that name.
Well, yeah, please.
there, there are receipts still stuck as bookmarks in books that I
Yes.
can't
Oh
tear
my
from
gosh.
myself.
Wait, that's so sweet.
Emma and I at one point where while recording, we brought up Borders, and I went through and I go, "Oh, look, I found the receipts." And then I flipped the book over, and there was a brief period in my life where I thought, well, I finally have to take all the price tags off of these. And it was such a moment of like the silliest grief as I was like, I took all of the border stickers off. Oh, well,
Yeah.
at least I have
Aw.
the receipt.
It's
Yeah.
all faded now. Yeah.
Yeah,
Can
absolutely.
barely
The
see.
like
Yeah.
most sun faded, no words. Did you have a horror book relationship ever, Rachel?
So I didn't because I like thought it wasn't for me. I never
Right.
read Goosebumps or anything.
Hmm. Same. I
But
thought Say Cheese and Die would take me out.
yes, even like the little stories like the
Oh,
ribbon
scary
around the neck.
stories. Yeah,
Yeah. Or
those
all
I
the
did gobble
um
up.
but when I got older, like high school, I was like a hashtag sad girl. So I was reading like Sylvia Plath and I was reading like Flannery O'Connor and I was reading and then led me to Shirley Jackson. So I
Hmm.
read Shirley Jackson stories, I read Hill House. Um and yeah. So I would say those are probably pretty formative for me. But like I considered it I like as much as it is horror, back then I was just like, this is just like
This is my
sad
sad
girl lit
girl.
fic.
Hmm. And that's also probably how they would have marketed it back then. I
Oh
think that's the
yeah.
other. I mean, I've talked to you and Clay about this. Like, horror is being accepted now, like pushed now. I feel like I didn't realize I read horror until all of the books that I had read and loved were reclassified as horror, and I went, "Oh, this is just a new genre, apparently." So I
You know
think it
what they
also
need to
speaks to the
put
change. Yeah.
into that new genre, something that needs to be reclassified? I'm now realizing that this was the very first horror novel that I read, The Rainbow Fish. I thought, as
You
like a
got
little
both of
marine
us.
biology kid who like loved fish,
Hmm.
I could not conceive of the joy that this book brought other people. I was like, that fish, that little gay fish, is ripping
Yes.
itself apart to appease these boring
For the
people.
boring straight
That
people.
octopus, like, straight up giving the advice to, like, peel off your scales. Oh my gosh. I thought that book was so gruesome, but I also loved it as a result.
I mean, when you look at it that way, new lens for the rainbow fish, but you're right. I also like just sitting there like, wait, but you looked beautiful and now this?
Yeah,
What?
don't, yeah, children, if there's something amazing and unique about yourself, make sure to distribute it to everybody
Right.
around you.
Don't dim your sparkle. Be
Yeah.
the holographic scale.
I like revisiting like these childhood books through like the horror lens, like Hungry Hungry Caterpillars, like it will never
Yeah.
be satisfied.
It will
Like,
never. Or if you give a mouse a cookie, like me, like little, this is like probably the beginning of like where my OCD began as a child and like catastrophizing. But I was like, if you give a mouse a cookie in the way that it escalates, I was like, this is never ending. Oh my God. Like, we're going to have to give this mouse the world and it still won't be enough.
it's never gonna be enough.
Yeah.
When does the mouse stop?
Yeah.
I love that. To look at kind of the way you two process your writing, horror is so layered between anything that you like, the message that you're trying to convey, which I feel like has one layer, but then also terror, suspense, humor, friendships, catharsis. How do you both balance those elements when you're writing? How is your process affected when you are trying to communicate in this genre? I'm looking at both of you and I can't tell.
I
I
I-
I
I'll
can't tell.
I'll start because my answer is kind of a cop out, but I don't really think
Please.
about it. I
Yeah.
don't think about like people sometimes ask me about like how do you balance the humor or the like and I I just sit down and like I write like character driven. I write close first person, so it's just like I'm writing through that character. That character doesn't know they're in a horror novel. Like it's really about I'm telling a story about a person and yes, horrific things are happening, but I know for me and pretty much everybody I know, we always use humor as a coping mechanism. And again, like my characters don't know they're in a horror novel, so they're not going to react. I have to like keep that in mind when I'm writing, and it's mostly intuitive. And yeah, I'm not really thinking about how do I get this balance right. It's not really where my focus is when I'm like sitting down to write. But Ryan, I'll be curious about you.
I mean, I would say our answers are similar, although I feel like I have a different way of explaining it where I feel like I've always sort of existed innately like at that balance of like humor and horror. Like
Mhm.
I get a lot of questions about the queerness in my books, right? Because my characters are all like super queer. So are the monsters, as it turns out. And like how to tease those two things apart. But for me, those have always been married concepts, right? Because for example, if I had to write down the story of like my adolescence, my childhood, like it would be a really funny story. It would be full of heart and humor and love. I was lucky enough to have like very supportive parents, and so like homophobia was a part of my life, but not like the defining problem of it. And yet, if I took that book and had to shelve it somewhere, it would have to be shelved in horror because at the same time, alongside all like the levity in my childhood, like my childhood was also defined by knowing that something was hunting me down, something that I couldn't even really name. There was a threat, an oncoming threat that would manifest often abruptly without any notice in the minds of my peers or the wrong aisle at Home Depot if I lost my father or something like that, because I was such a flamboyant kid. And I think a lot of marginalized people kind of understand this innately, right? Like this sense of something stalking them that's kind of formless yet like ever present. And so I feel like these two things have always kind of had to coincide within me. And so I don't think it's like that. I don't really think of it as things that I'm combining. I think it would be really hard for me to kind of uh, tease these things apart. If ever, if someone told me to like write a book with like no stupid dad jokes as these characters are running away from like monsters, I think I'd have a hard time with that.
And I would have a hard time accepting that. I mean, we
Yeah,
need
no
the
one
stupid
wants.
dad
Yeah,
jokes.
yeah,
What do I live for if not dumb dad jokes?
yeah,
But there is absolutely innate terror. I mean, thinking like of just being young and the sheer panic in the phrase, "Hey, I have a question I want to ask you."
yeah. Oh my
Mhm.
gosh, yeah,
Like
totally.
nothing made my heart drop faster or me not trust a person anymore like that
Mm-hmm.
question.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, ooh. the,
Right?
the chill has set in. Um, you are both very character focused. You are both very kind of like atmospheric. I think there is so much to the writing. When an idea comes to you for a story, what have been some of your wildest sparks over the years? What has been the thing that makes you go, can I really turn that into a book? Or, just inspirations? Ryan, you lit up. I'm coming to you. I feel like you had a look.
The book that I just had come out, The Dead of Summer, is very pelagic in nature. It's very sort of oceanic, and there's a few different things going on there in terms of like the inspirations, right? Like the setting is sort of loosely based on Provincetown, Massachusetts, even though I've set my book in Maine. And I wanted to set it in like sort of queer sanctuary. Like that is all stuff that kind of comes from my own repertoire of like experiences. But the kernel itself for the monster in the book is because I was walking with some friends on a beach, and I'm like a seashell kid. Like I would always arrive home with pockets full of rocks, right? And then I'd have to go to the sink to get them wet again to remind myself how pretty they were, right? Because they dry out. Anyways, um, so I'm still this kid, right? I have far fewer pockets in the Speedos that I currently wear. So I'm now holding a lot of rocks on the beach. And one of them, and I still have it with me, it's like in my backpack. I bring it with me on tour, like a total nerd. But this one
Oh,
rock like washed ashore, and it's all of these other fused together oysters. And I could feel like water sloshing around in it. So I started to like pick at it, thinking like, oh, this has been fused together by years and years and years of like pressure and time, right? Without even thinking, I like brought it to my ear, and I had this moment of like something ancient yet alive coming out of this thing and sliding into my ear and using me as like a seashell, right? Like I was the next vessel to kind of help this organism breach through the divide between water and earth and sort of spread itself amongst land dwelling organisms. And anyhow, I said all of this to my friends, and they're very used to me doing long monologues like this. And they were like, please shut up. Like, will you please like throw the rock back into the water? And I didn't. I kept it. I still have it. Um and but they were like, this isn't one of your little horror stories, and I'm a very spiteful person. So the second they said that, I was like, I'm gonna tell my agent about this. And then I
and
wrote
it
a
is
whole
going to be one of my little horror
duology
stories.
about it. Yeah.
Nothing like the support of your friends to really keep you going.
And I have to say, they're right. I do this a lot, and most of the ideas are pretty bad. But like, it's not fun to eat dinner with somebody who's like, "What if we all died? What if we all killed each other?" And like, it's just I don't blame them for being sick of it.
That
But
sounds
if-
fun to me, to be fair.
Yeah,
But
Well,
right,
okay,
right.
we could get
I'm in the
we could
business,
get to yeah.
but then I'm in the business, so
Yeah,
Right. You're like, no, this sounds like a writing retreat. Keep going. I'm ready.
I know. Now, yeah, I'll give you a call the next time inspiration strikes.
Rachel, they don't want to listen to me talk about death and murder again.
I'll be
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, tell
You're
me.
like, I'm clearing my
Bill.
schedule.
Yeah.
Well, I am set. But Rachel, have you ever had any of those like strange moments or just something that you go like, how am I going to bring this to life?
So first of all, like you guys are both so on it, and I feel bad because I'm showing up and I'm
No.
like a great value me who like is just like on a Friday afternoon who hasn't like slept. But and I feel like my ideas are a little bit, they come to me and I sound like a smarmy, like Hollywood guy where I'm just like, well, what if this and this? Like I'm pitching like a log line. But I know if an idea is gonna work if like I am like quietly complaining about something or like working out an issue or angsty about something, and then like a supernatural thing kind of clicks into place at the same time. So
Mm.
the easiest like one I think to talk about would probably be for like So Thirsty, where I was like looking in the mirror one day and I was like scrutinizing my reflection and I was just like, this is exhausting. I've been doing this. Like the earliest I remember doing this is at 6 years old, of being like, what, picking my body apart, picking my face apart. And like, now I'm like, oh my God, do I have wrinkles and whatever? And then I was like, what would it be like to like not see my reflection? And like vampires don't see their reflection. And vampires also don't age. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna write a vampire story that like gets up all my angst about aging. And then, through then it became like, yeah, but it's also gonna be like Thelma and Louise. And like it sort of kind of evolves like that in that way. But the metaphor usually opens up as I'm writing. But usually it's like, what am I angsty about? What's going on? What's an issue that like is at the top of my mind, something that I really want to work out, and then a supernatural vessel um to tell that story. And yeah, I wish it was like something where I was like walking and I like saw something cool. Like it was but usually it's just like me alone being like, ugh.
But
That's
I
interesting though. I like, do you often have, when you speak about like the metaphor at like the core of your work, like do you often have that in hand before you begin, or is that sometimes revealed to you as you go along? I'm just curious.
I always have it in hand when I start, but usually it opens up in different ways where like for So Thirsty, it was originally just about aging, and then it became like, yeah, but also vampires have like, they're always, well, my editor was like, if you write a vampire book and call it So Thirsty, it has to like, people are going to expect it to be sexy. And I was like, okay. And then I started thinking about desire and life and what it means to like really be living a life, not just like going through the motions. And so the metaphor sort of expanded from aging to being like living and desire and what it's like to deprive yourself of things and then have to shift into a body where you can't deprive yourself because the thing that you want is the thing that you need and all that stuff. So
yeah.
usually I need like some sort of like throbbing ignore that gesture that I just did. A second. I
Yeah,
was supposed
Andrew
to
Blur that.
Let's
That
put the
was-
hands down.
I was like that was a throbbing heart for what it's
I
worth.
no, I saw heart.
Okay,
I saw
good.
heart.
I
was
saw
like-
like fresh out of the chest.
I just listened
totally.
to Taylor's new album this morning, and she has a song on that album where I'm like, ooh, Taylor. She's in her Sabrina era. So now I'm just like, everything is anyway. So
But I think both of your answers make sense for the way that the two of you go about it, what's presented. I mean, Rachel, it makes a lot of sense to me that you've got the process of, well, see here, kid, we're going to talk about this. And then the metaphors build and you end up with Thelma and Louise thirsting for blood. And Ryan, it makes sense that it's just the kid who discovered stories later in life that found them in small ways is now finding them everywhere, and your friends are telling you which ones you should actually bother with or not. Both of you get brilliant billing in my mind when it comes to like the pitch emails, when it comes to the promotion online. With both of your recent books, Play Nice being sold as like a Barbie dream house, a haunted Barbie dream house, and The Dead of Summer with just kind of like what I think of as I think of all of the scholastic TikToks of you terrorizing the office, Ryan. How do both of you feel with how your books get put out into the world? Because that's part of the process too. And I know there's so many nuances to that.
That's a loaded question.
I know, I
Um,
Yeah.
know.
I I think it's interesting because um, marketing is such a huge part of being an author now, and how we present ourselves in social media and how our work's presented, I think matters. And I enjoy it because there's so little that we can control about. We can control the books that we write, and then after that, when you put it out into the world, you have no more control. And so I think having the opportunity to market and speak about it and sort of getting to explain like the secret sauce of how you made it and all of these things is is really fun and empowering. And yeah, I think it's interesting because we have input into our covers, and like I am very lucky with my covers, but you don't always get to I have a lot of author friends, and we're asked and we get consultation, but we don't have control. And sometimes people will be like, "I love this cover." And I'm like, "Thanks. I had nothing to do with it. It was like Katie Anderson and like um
It was in the packet that I could choose from,
yeah."
and beautifully so, but
But I think you can kind of like, not to be cringe, but you can like curate a vibe. And that's what I try and do
Absolutely.
with each book that I have come out. I'm like, all right, what is the vibe? What is the energy that this book is bringing? And how can I like channel that and capture that and try to convey that to readers who might be interested? Um, but I really enjoy the getting to market the book and to have like fun with it and like play dress up on tour and to I don't know, I think it's a fun way to celebrate the book and to also feel like I have some sense of control over anything in this world.
Oh, that makes total sense to me too. I think I started there and I was there for a long time about sort of feeling like everything was a celebration. I don't know what happened, but I think this like past year, I swerved out of that and I started just kind of feeling like I don't know if it was so self-conscious, but I kind of realized I was like, oh, I feel like everything about me has turned into like an infomercial for myself and for whatever I'm working on next. And because publishers do look to authors to market themselves so heavily, like I don't know, suddenly it's like I stepped out of the spotlight like for a second too long and could like see the stage and the proscenium and everything like that. And it like spooked me a little bit. I was like, oh my God, wait, like it really does matter. I've seen the difference in like my sales versus like a book that I really tried hard on versus something that like I wasn't as maybe like exuberant about online. And I used to really love the like direct control I could kind of exhibit over my success. And now I think I'm a little scared by it, or the effort that it really does require, in part because there's also been, for me at least, like a pretty obvious shift in the like algorithm's response to like gay things right now. Like
Mm.
I remember for the first time ever, like I think it was like a year ago, one of the little ads that pops up on like TikTok, being like, "Do you want to promote your video or whatever?" And I was like, you know what, this is like for a book that I'm writing, and or it's coming out soon, and yeah, sure, whatever. I'll spend like $20 on a TikTok ad, right, just to see what
yeah.
would happen. And what happened was I got hundreds and hundreds of homophobic comments that were blaming me for daring to promote something gay to the world, right? Um, and of course I like favorited some of them because many of them were like, why would you think anyone would care about this? And at the time I was sitting on like film adaptation news for this particular project. So I was like, I'll show you why someone would care about like I sort of had this like revenge fantasy in mind. But I feel like some of my enthusiasm for like the promotional side of things has taken just like weathering damage from like the climate that I'm often speaking into. Um, and so I'm trying to, but all of this to say that I am trying to kind of get that back because I love the performance of it. Like I love talking about the books and talking to readers. I love when other authors talk about like their books too. Like it's one of my favorite
Mhm.
types of content to absorb. And so I don't know what's going on with me, but I'm, I'm trying to kind of find my way back towards like the like the pure excitement of it.
I will say I'm not on TikTok, so I don't like I I haven't dared. I like have it, but I like haven't figured it out and don't put in the effort. I will say I do think it can be really powerful and feel good, but it can also feel like pressure and it can also like um it can be a lot sometimes and you do get the like
Mhm.
harassment and feedback and strangers
Yeah.
and your DMs and all that stuff. Um so I do think it can be a lot, but that's but I think that's like the weight of the world in general right now.
No, I think you're
That's
right.
Right.
Like
which
I think maybe
sucks,
what it
but
is that like it used to feel fun and significant, but the significance part of it for me has taken like a huge hit, just as like, publishing content into a news feed sandwiched between like a post from like Al Jazeera and then something about like, the floods somewhere in the United States. And it's just I have a hard time sometimes clicking into the performance of it all.
yeah.
But I used to really love it. And so I don't resent other people for doing it. I don't it's like a rule that I've made up for myself. So I'm trying to unmake that.
It's hard to find the balance of like when does this feel healthy and when does it feel productive and good and when does it feel icky?
Right. And when is it the like, I have met the like duty to do my work justice, but also, oh, I'm still enjoying what I'm doing. I mean, because at the same time, for every single one of those hate comments, there's a kid who finds the book who needs that book. So like you end up with so much put upon both of you as far as the like, well, Rachel, like you were saying earlier, you put it out into the world and then it becomes its own monster of sorts because your fans could react negatively to it or positively or share things you don't need them to share back with you. But then you also just have to kind of live in the belief that like the person who needed that found it. And anyone who's a hater probably hasn't read a book before anyway. So I'll say the mean things. It's fine. Um, since all of that was scary, I will use this as a fun segue into, have you ever managed to scare yourself while writing? Like just freak yourself out and you go, "Ooh, I need to put the pen down and like turn on Gilmore Girls for an hour."
Totally. There are scenes that I have not revisited since I wrote them like the first time. Like maybe I responded to a few comments from like the line editors just to make sure that I was clarifying their queries. But oh yeah, oh my gosh. Half everything that I write I usually just like deeply scary to me. And there are certain things that I'm just like so grossed out by that I thought exposure therapy would maybe be something I could explore through my own writing. And it has never worked for me.
I I think again, because I'm such a type A control freak, it's harder for me to scare myself because I'm in control of the thing.
Mm.
And so even if I write something that's like creepy and like gives me the chills, I'll like be like, yeah, but that came from my brain and like I'm in charge here. And then
Yeah, there's a
um
new sheriff in
yeah.
town. Yeah.
It's but and even like reading horror books, I find I show me a horror movie and forget it. Like I still see the Babadook like every night. Like I just like I traumatize myself so easily with because I feel like I can't control it and I don't have control. But even reading, I feel a little bit because I can visualize it in my head and I can control how scary the thing is. Um so, but very, very rarely will I scare myself just because I'm like, like I feel
I'm the puppet master.
yes, yeah, yeah.
Uh, oh, also, I feel like this whole conversation, I'm turning into like 90s version of me sitting on the phone with my friends or like grab my headphone cord and just start twirling it.
I miss that the
I
like chunky
know.
phone cord.
No, I miss the good coil to just, so what are you doing?
Yeah,
Mhm.
And you can only take it so far. So you're like trying to go into your room and close
Being
it.
like tethered to the kitchen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tethered down. I know my mother would always buy like the longest cord and then the longest phone cord too, because she'd be like, well, I got to go to the office. I'm like, okay. What about the rest of us? She's like, you can sit right there on the phone where I can still hear you. That makes sense. I'm 5, but I'm just calling the like movie phone to see what's playing that I'm not going to go to because I can't take myself.
So much nostalgia. So much nostalgia.
Over the last 5 years, horror as a genre has grown tremendously, as we've kind of talked about, both in YA and adult spaces. What changes have both of you noticed between publishing, promotion, readership, what's being told, and are there any trends, themes, or voices that excite you that you're keeping an eye on that you want to highlight here? I know I throw the big one right out toward the end.
Question. Yeah,
I'll take the opportunity to just like holler about different writers that I love.
Please.
I think Alexis Henderson is a genius. I love, love, love Alexis's work. I am a huge CJ Lead fan. I think there's so many different voices in the space right now. And it's just a really exciting time to be in horror. I think people are starting to understand that it doesn't need to just be one thing. And it can be like if you love slashers, there's something for you. If you don't like gore, if you just want something like moody and atmospheric, there's stuff for you. Isabel Cañas, like you want like a little bit of romance. I feel like there's something for everybody in the genre. And I think readers are sort of coming into it, and I want to continue to call them in. And yeah, I think that's what I've noticed in the past couple of years, just a bunch of different new voices and so much variety.
And the shape of the genre has become amorphous in a really beautiful way. It doesn't have to be supernatural to be horror anymore. There's not that like, to be this, you have to be that. Sometimes the horror is men. Sometimes the horror is a concept. Like I'm thinking of Model Home. That was fantastic. But like stuff like that just kind of jumps out that I go, okay, there's so much shape changing around us.
Yeah. And I mean, you could go something like extreme, like with like an Eric LaRocca, or you can pick up something that's like, I'm trying to think of something mild now off the top of my head. I think it's the last thing I read that wasn't as intense as Eric.
I love how you've gone from like, oh, I couldn't go near horror to now like, I can't think of anything mild enough.
Yeah.
I'm almost done with Hungerstone. That's like the mildest horror I've read this month.
I want to read that one so badly.
It's beautiful. Lesbian vampires. Come on.
Love it.
love.
Gimme.
In the 1890s, I'll take it. Ryan, what about you? What have you noticed?
I mean, definitely in the YA space, there's been a huge surge of like a lot of diverse writers, I think, like running towards horror and then infesting their stories with like their own anxieties about like, societal issues, which I think is the right container for that. From pure enjoyment though, I think of like Adam Sass has a great slasher called Your Lonely Nights Are Over. That is fantastic. I think about it all the time. Kosoko Jackson as well has some great stuff. I always feel like that's a cop out because I'm like good friends with the two of those people. Another friend of mine, but someone who like definitely deserves every mention is Tiffany D. Jackson writes like some of the most thrilling and I actually don't even know that Tiffany would call her work horror. Like they're more like thrillers, I guess. But often she'll take like things in the headlines and write out like sort of the young adult perspective in them. And like Grown by her is probably one of the most fantastic books I've ever read. And so I always name her. She gets a lot of recognition in general, and it's all deserved. So I feel like I'm sort of just preaching to the choir often when I throw her name out there, but she deserves it. So I'll keep doing it.
But we'll take it. I mean, like Joelle Wellington, I think also probably technically falls in thriller, but I love to blur them together because the same way that I watch my favorite movies is probably the same way that I read my favorite horror and thrillers. And Joelle, thank you for shouting out Libby in your second book. Just shameless plug, read through it. Just like,
love.
I was researching on Libby and I went, me just sitting at home reading for fun. I went, oh, surprise!
Is this play about us?
I live that. Uh, but it's so true. Seeing the blurring of lines, the attacking of the headlines, so many of these just very important things, and it's so exciting. I mean, the space is only getting bigger from here, right? Is that how both of you would feel with horror?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. That's my hope and my mission.
It's a mission statement I think we can
Yeah.
all get behind,
No.
especially on this call. But I suppose as we run short on time, I should drag you through a horror-themed lightning round of questions.
Oh, I'm ready.
Yeah.
If you'll indulge me. Just shout out whatever you're feeling. Haunted house or creepy woods?
Haunted house.
Haunted house.
I knew
I'm
that
going in the
answer.
woods.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh my!
no.
I need Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's still shelter.
It's still shelter. Favorite final girl?
Jade Daniels.
Oh my god! Wait, what's Jade from?
Stephen Graham Jones trilogy, Indian Lake trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I love The Only Good Indian. That's by him too, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, incredible! That's like one of my favorite books. I don't know. I can't think of anyone fast enough. Skip me.
That's okay. Best jump scare in a book or a movie you've seen or read recently?
Have you read Catherine House by Elizabeth Thomas?
I love Catherine.
That I would say that's mild. So I figured it out.
You're
found it.
I came back
your
to it.
models.
I was like, but there's a jump scare in that book that I think about to this day. And like, it's
Love
not, I
that.
wouldn't say it's a scary book. It's like dark academia. It's very atmospheric and like that kind of like slow dread horror that I love.
Mhm.
But there is a jump scare in that book that like, I like closed the book and was like, wait a second.
I need
Yeah.
to go back to it. I love that book. I haven't read it in a long time though.
It's so good.
I feel like I was reading I'm reading Mona Awad's sequel to Bunny right now too, and there's been a few moments like that have kind of like made me gasp, but like they're written jump scares. Well, we're talking about books, obviously they're written down, but like it's more so just like the twist of language more so than something actually happening in like the physical nature of the space.
Yes.
And I've like laughed out loud several times. I don't know. Laughing out loud is sort of like a jump scare.
Yeah.
know,
Reading.
I
Like,
love
I'm
that.
scaring myself by laughing along.
Who was that noise?
I also think like Catherine House reminded me of Our Wives Under the Sea, which also has like some really, really like dense tension throughout all of it. So even like the tiniest appearance of somebody specific in that book made me gasp several times. And I can definitely see that being, the thing that makes a theater full of people scream.
That's a
Yes.
beautiful, beautiful book. I love that book too.
Love that book, yeah.
The listeners are going to be absolutely gorged on great book recs from this. Classic monster you'd most want to write again, or fight? Vampire, werewolf, zombie, or ghost? You two made it difficult on me. I had to like phrase that 20 different ways while
Well, like, so we have to, is it like,
I mean, you could
MF
pick
is it like
anyone.
MF
Wait,
but-
what?
is it
No,
MFK
no,
where you have to like
no,
pick,
no,
like,
just
I'm
like-
going to fight Frankenstein, I'm going to write the werewolf, like,
No,
what is it?
sorry.
Right?
I see what happened. No, if you wanted to write them, if you wanted to write or write them again, or if you want to pick one you'd beat in a fight, you could do either. You could either like give me the writing answer or the fighting answer.
I'm
I'll
coming
take
off
Not
all
right
of
in
them.
MFK.
I'm going to
Oh.
take them all. No,
You-
I'm kidding.
Well, yeah, because you're the sheriff.
I'm kidding.
So
The
you're
sheriff
taking
in
them all
town.
out.
I'm kidding. I like a lake monster. I like a what do you call the gill man kind of guy?
Like the
the
seaweed
swamp
people?
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would love to write something like that. I've like tried before and I can't figure it out. But I would not fight the gill man because I
Mhm.
don't
Can't
like
breathe underwater.
I don't like I'm like the opposite, Brian. I'm like, I don't really like fish. They freak me out. So as soon as he like
he's
touched me with
sopping
his
wet.
as soon as he like
Disgusting.
touched me with his like web, I'd be like, ew, and then I'd be
So you were clapping at the end
game
of
over.
Rainbow Fish. You were
Yeah.
going, yeah,
No,
good. Get rid of
no.
those scales.
No, as long as he's not bothering me, he's under the sea. Let him be who he
Yeah.
is, you know? Just as long as he's not like, I'm gonna like put all my scales on your skin.
Well,
To be clear,
see?
I don't want that for myself.
I know, sorry. I'm
You're
like,
making it sound like
no,
I would love the
no.
Gilmantic to be
I
like
th-
a big
do you
fishy
like the
hug.
I like to go to the aquarium, but like sometimes people are like, look at this deep sea fish. I'm like, I don't want to know.
Uh,
I don't want
he's
to
down
know.
there for a reason.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He's
Yeah.
it's the sea's business.
it's none of my
Yeah.
business what's down at the
Mhm.
bottom of the ocean. I'm not
Yeah.
curious about it. I don't want to know. I feel the same
What
way
if,
Put
about
in my
space.
spot.
it
Yes.
makes it your business.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's like very much the duology that I'm in the middle of right now, writing the book that came out and then the sequel comes out next year is very much like, well, what if the ocean made it, made it onto land and made it our business? And it's that, I mean, The Dead of Summer is about zombies, but I don't describe it that way often because so many people are like, I don't read zombies, but like my version in the book are not like rotting, rancid corpses. They're like encrusted in coral and like barnacles and stuff. It's like a parasite. So I've given my take on the zombie. I think if I was like fighting, I think I have to fight like a vampire. I don't know. Because there's a known methodology for dealing with them.
Yeah, it's like
And
it's daytime. You're
oh,
done.
Bye.
right, yeah. Like, what if
Sun's
I'm gonna,
out.
I'm gonna
Bye.
use my sparkling, sunny personality, and that's gonna that's gonna blind the vampire.
I'm sure you can get like one of those super powered flashlights on a TikTok shop ad, and that might work too.
I know, right? Like, what's the vampire gonna
Brighter
do
than
when I
the
turn my
sun.
seasonal depression light on it?
I'll cure sads and vampires.
Yeah, exactly. Like, let's go. But also, to be clear, I think in most horror scenarios, I'm probably gonna die towards the first act.
I
I'm the
think you should give
personality
yourself.
kill.
No, I think you should both give yourself more credit.
Okay.
I think we're making it pretty far.
I
They
think,
have to keep us around for our sparkling personalities, or else the story's going to be boring.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I believe in that. I believe in that. I will fight to the death, and who knows what for. Unless it's an apocalypse situation, I don't know if I want to fight to the
That's
death for that
true.
one.
If it's the
Horror,
apocalypse,
yes.
if it's the apocalypse, I'm out. You people in the like I watched The Walking Dead for a while. I'm just like I would have given up so fast. Like quality of life is not good. There's no Wi-Fi. I'm not making it.
No, absolutely not. Is there a trope you secretly love?
A horror trope or just any
A
trope?
horror trope. Yeah.
Well, it's like I can't even think of one.
I like where it's like we're trapped in this together and then they fall in
Yeah.
love.
Oh,
okay.
bring the romance into it.
Like 28 days later. No, 20
Yeah.
Yeah.
28 days later where they're like, it's the end of the world and it's only us.
Yes.
Yeah. I like that.
Romantic.
into it.
I like when we realize that the monster is not the monster,
Ooh, that's a good
Love
one.
that.
right?
Love
Like, it's
that.
usually like a byproduct of some other evil that's
Yeah.
pressuring it into doing whatever. Like, I like when we humanize or like listen to the monster.
I love that.
I love when
And
we
then-
kiss the monster.
Just a little bit. Just a little kiss.
A little
As a
just like
treat.
on the nose, on the snoot. That's it.
And then to wrap up, the best snack for a horror movie marathon.
I'm a classic popcorn or like a popcorn with like, you put like the milk duds in it. You put the others like
Mm-hmm.
sweet and salty.
Love that.
Popcorn is like one of my favorite foods. Like, movie theater popcorn is something you could trap me under a box in a dark alley with a trail of movie theater popcorn. You get me. But I'm gonna shout out, I love a Nerd's gummy cluster. It's a
Absolutely.
great little movie addition to counter the salty.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
I'm going to enjoy some after this call, as a matter of fact. And then before I let you both go, let the folks know where to find you, anything you want to promote, final random shout outs.
People want to find me on social media. I'm getting back into the spirit. But the Ryan Lasala on like TikTok and Instagram and I don't know, Threads, I guess. I'll shout the book that I'm promoting right now is The Dead of Summer. I would love if people would go and find it, and the hardcover is absolutely beautiful, but the audiobook is incredible. They did such a good job on it. It's like in the book there's like found footage and like media, like interviews and stuff like that. And instead of just like transcribing it to audio, they have like actors sitting acting out the scenes, and they did such a cool job. So if you love audiobooks, I'll recommend checking it out in that way. But yeah, that's me.
I will scream your audiobooks every time. I was taking my dog on a walk while I was listening to the Honeys for the first time, and it was like, B, oh,
Yeah, it's terrifying. Yeah.
because I was all of a sudden there was buzzing, and I'm like,
Mhm.
context, think about it. It's the
Mhm.
headphones.
Mhm.
And Rachel, what about you?
Play Nice is out now, and you can find me on Instagram and Threads at Rachel Harrison Scove.
Love it. Well, thank you both so much for indulging me and for being here and for sharing your stories.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
bearing with me, and it was lovely to talk to you both. Happy
Yes, lovely.
Friday.
Yes.
Happy Friday. And listeners, now we will head over into our next segment. Well, hey, y'all. Before we head into segment 2 for some Halloween horror recs, I wanted to take a moment to offer you a few cozier Halloween recommendations from our friends over at Kensington Books. First, we've got The Cafe Between Pumpkin and Pie by Marina Adair, Kate Angel, and Stacey Finns. In Moonbright, Maine, there's a pumpkin on every porch, fresh brewed cider in every cup, and the sweetest sorcery in the air. Before, after, and during the excitement of the annual Halloween parade, gathering at the Corner Cafe is a beloved Moonbright tradition. It's a chance for all the revelers to share treats, hospitality, spooky stories, and local legends. The most magically romantic legend of all promises that a Moonbright woman will marry the man she sees reflected in a mirror on Halloween. For 3 such singles, the crunch of fall leaves and smell of fresh baked pie sets the perfect stage for the trick and treat of the genuine enchantment of true love. So, again, that is The Cafe Between Pumpkin and Pie by Marina Adair, Kate Angel, and Stacey Finns. Then, with a cozy cover like this, we've got Halloween Night Murder, a collection of 3 novellas by Leslie Meyer, Lee Hollis, and Liz Ireland that just came out August 26th, 2025. There's usually a chill in the air when Halloween arrives, but in these 3 novellas by beloved cozy mystery authors, the crimes are even colder than the haunted climate. We've got Halloween Night Murder by Leslie Meyer, Death of a Halloween Night Stalker by Lee Hollis, and Mrs. Claus and the Wily Witch by Liz Ireland. Need I say more? Check out Halloween Night Murder now. And last but certainly not least, we've got A Letter to 3 Witches by Elizabeth Bass. Bewitched meets practical magic in this sparkling and quirky rom-com with an enchanted twist. When romance problems cause their powers to go berserk, a trio of witches whose family was banned from practicing magic risk getting in serious trouble from the Grand Council. Can they get their magic and their love lives in order before it's too late? Find out more in A Letter to 3 Witches by Elizabeth Bass and its follow-up novel, The Witch Hitch. Now, you can find these titles from our friends at Kensington Books and all the titles mentioned here or by our guest hosts or by our authors today in today's episode linked in the episode description. Now, with that, let's get into some horror recommendations with our guest hosts. Well, grab your candy corn and carve a pumpkin because we're leaning all the way into the Halloween spirit. We've got bookish tricks, terrifying treats, and plenty of wrecks that are more fun than bobbing for apples. Though, maybe scarier too. Now, this segment is split because there are too many amazing wrecks to go around, and I have so many amazing voices joining me today. But first up here, we have the lovely Jananie and Kayla. If you two want to take a moment and do a brief intro for anyone joining us for the first time in season 2 and getting to see both of your lovely faces.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jananie from the channel This Story Ain't Over on YouTube, and I'm also on Instagram and TikTok. And I am always recommending my favorite books by diverse authors and just trying to get people to read more broadly. And I'm very excited to be on this episode because I am a new horror reader. I feel like I have always loved spooky things, but I feel like, delving into horror as a genre was never really the thing before, but now I love it. It's like my favorite thing. So,
New
yeah.
horror reader is like the most amazing sentence to hear. But I mean, what drew you in? Kayla, I'm so sorry. I know you're ready to intro, but Janani, what converted you into horror recently?
Ooh, that's a great question. I feel like actually it's so funny that Kayla's here because I feel like Kayla was one of the people responsible because Kayla's, reads a lot of thriller and horror, and I watch Kayla's channel all the time. and have gotten some really great recs. But yeah, I was always into like gothic books. So that aspect of horror I was like always into, but I think some of the more traditional horror I saw recommended on Kayla's channel and a few other like book influencers pages, and I just like picked up a few and then fell in love because I think there's something about horror that lets you explore some really interesting themes and, do some really interesting commentary. So,
Oh,
yeah,
a- absolutely. I also had a sneaking suspicion Kayla was at fault. So for you
leading
picking them up.
questions.
Exactly. I'm leading the witness. But it's so true. I love the way that we can look at and dissect different elements that sometimes it feels like it's too hard for people to bring up outside of like the Oprah's book club lit fic pick that horror sometimes tackles more digestibly. But Kayla, I feel like I'm leaving you out in the dark. Please let the folks who you know who you are and where to find you.
I'm so sorry. There's a little bit of a dog barking in my neighbor's house, and I really hope nobody can hear it.
It's not picking up. You're good.
Okay, hopefully that continues. I'm Kayla. You can find me at Books and Lala everywhere. I post twice weekly on my YouTube channel. I have for 11 years now. I read horror and thrillers and fantasy and romance and nonfiction and kind of like a little bit of everything. I originally started reading horror when I was, I think, 11. My family got banned from the library, the public library, from like not returning books. I should probably keep that information off of a library podcast. But I remember so vividly because it was summer break and I had to start shopping like my mom's bookshelves because I couldn't go to the public library. And she had fantasy and horror to choose from. And that was it. And I was adamantly a fantasy hater at the time. Probably still was until I was like, I don't know, 26. So I started reading a short story collection from Stephen King. And this was the first time I ever read horror. I was like 11 years old, reading these gruesome little short stories. And I think this is where my taste for the weird stuff began. But I love seeing Jananie and like other people starting to get into horror. I love seeing people just exploring the genre and finding out what they like, because I think there's a lot of kind of mistakes that I made going into different like subgenres of horror to find what I actually like. So it's so nice that people have other people and that we all have people to watch and find recommendations from so we can really hone in our tastes.
1,000%. I think, and with some of the other folks that'll be joining in the recommendations, seeing how everyone's voice and like choices seem to be shaped around like, oh, you can see where this is inspired from in the other things you read and recommend. Even if we all come in today with horror picks, they will all be such different flavors of horror. And I find that fascinating. Also, I even love the like we were banned from the library for not returning books because it also shows like how much the library has changed over the years because like my library no longer has fines. There are no fines or late fees. Now, I mean, if you damage a book and, whatever, there might be some sort of fines, but all of their like large print words are no fines. So the book is late. The book is late. We hope you bring it back. So it's the evolution with time.
Absolutely. I remember a couple years ago, I dropped a library book in a puddle as I was getting out of my vehicle. And I was terrified to like go into the library and be like, I'm so sorry, I have to pay a replacement fee. And they were like, it's no big deal. It was so chill. And I was like, this is so different from when I was 10 years old. And the library was like, no, you can't have books anymore.
You can't have
Yeah,
books.
the anxiety around returning a damaged book. Oh my gosh, I was definitely that person.
Oh, it's so real. But I know the two of you are dying to give me Rex. Pun intended, I guess. Jananie, I'm gonna make you start first.
Ooh, okay. We're gonna start with one that's like a little horror adjacent because I love this book so much. And you could say it's like a bit of a dark academia fantasy, but I feel like it has horrific parts or feels like a horror. And that is An Academy for Liars by Alexis Henderson. Um, this is definitely a dark academia, but I love this book because it essentially attacks this idea from the perspective of someone who has not had a great time in life. Our main character, Lennon, is struggling with her mental health and has sort of seen her life become this sort of unimaginable thing. And I think that in some ways is a bit horrific, seeing your life end up in a way that you didn't expect and sort of trying to pull yourself out of that. And she has this very emotional moment. She's at her own engagement party that ends in fiasco. And she, finds herself taking a very sort of drastic uh, move, but she's stopped by someone sort of inviting her to this academy that essentially has been following people throughout their lives and then invites them to this academy for this second chance to learn this type of magic that is based off of the idea of persuasion. So exercising your own will over another person. But I think a lot of the book is sort of focused on Lennon's, mental health and um, what's going on with her in that regard and how she's getting the second chance. And there's a lot of moments where you're very scared for her and what's going to happen. And I think a lot of what she's facing is very scary and horrific. Like it does the suspense very, very well and the mystery very well. But then there's also a lot of scenes, I think, in like the later half that just feel so tense in that horrific way. And it feels a bit like, gothic. And I just loved it so much. So Academy for Liars.
Oh, totally. I feel like Dark Academia fully pulls from that kind of like gothic haunted house energy, but also as you were saying about the suspense. And then when you have to ask like the very human question of
Yeah.
if you could influence or persuade or, convince someone to do something beyond their own will and choice, would you? I think there's like innate human horror in that.
Yeah. They're also, rats in the situation that they test on, which was also very, very creepy. So yeah, it was good.
Atmosphere is there.
Yes.
Alexis Henderson is such a good pull because she
Yeah.
also has a couple, like House of Hunger and The Year of the Witching are so good. And I think she does really good at like a transitionary take. Like if you are listening to this podcast and you're a younger reader and you're trying to get into adult stuff, she is that perfect bridge because a lot of times it's like she's talking about pretty young characters, but they're starting to have to deal with really adult circumstances. Great pull. Oh, I guess I should get into mine. Okay, sorry. I'm just like, I want to talk more about Jananie's book. Um, okay, so I love when we come here and not only do we have such different taste, because I actually didn't like that book. So I love that you recommended it. Um, but we also like
I
pitch
love
books
that.
differently. Because like you so eloquently explain the plot of the book. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to explain why this is my pick instead. So horror movies were such a big part of my childhood. I was never really given any parental guidance or supervision with what I was watching. And my dad was a big horror movie guy. So I think at like 10 years old, he thought it was okay for me to be watching like Rob Zombie's House of a Thousand Corpses and Ginger Snaps. And I remember Jeepers Creepers was one of the most terrifying, I'm sure it probably still is. I couldn't rewatch it. Terrifying movies I've ever seen. So my first recommendation is for like the horror movie fans, people who grew up with horror movies and maybe you haven't read a lot of horror fiction. So I wanted to recommend I Was a Teenage Slasher by Stephen Graham Jones. This is my favorite author, and this is his 2024 release. I recommend all of his books, but this one to me is for the horror movie fans. It's such a unique take on the slasher genre because we're seeing through the eyes of a killer, but he doesn't want to be doing what he's doing. He's not fully in control. And the explanation you get behind that is just so good and it's so juicy. I picked this again for people who haven't read a lot of horror, maybe are coming here for recommendations of getting into the genre, because I think this is a good pick for people who read a lot of general fiction, because there is a lot of inner monologue and it would be easier for you to get into it, that it has such a slower pace and it feels so much just general fiction for some of it. But there is like horrific things happening. Obviously, it's a guy reminiscing on one summer in his teens where he was slaughtering people. So it's violent, but at the same time, it's really fun and it's campy and it's somehow heartwarming at the same time. So that's the one that I would recommend the most. suddenly, like, I read it last year and it's like in my top 5 favorite books of all time.
Oh, I loved I Was a Teenage Slasher.
Oh, I'm so glad you've read it.
It is so good because I love the, like, almost magic system is the best way I could think to put it,
Mhm.
which I can't say too much because then it spoils the fun of the book, but, like, the logic behind his identity as a slasher, and I also think it is one of the most accessible Stephen Graham Jones books. All of his books are beautifully written. They tackle so many important conversations. They have, like, this just bonkers depth when you're looking at the horror genre, but it's also the easiest one, like you said, for anyone to either come into the genre or come into Stephen Graham Jones.
Yeah. I love him as an author, and I would it's hard because I wanna recommend everything he's ever written, but I know that he's a difficult one for people to get into, so I always recommend, like, his novellas maybe first to get a taste for his writing, because it's different, but it's so hard to explain what's different about it.
It was also interesting to see him write this book, like, tone-wise, but I guess then once you bring up his novellas, I go, "Oh, right," if you if you kind of, like, step back and look at some of the different works.
I'll have to try this one because I have so many Stephen Graham Jones books like on my shelves that I've like grabbed and I want to read them. I just haven't gotten around to them. And I am going to be reading Buffalo Hunter Hunter this month with my book club. But I definitely need to read this one as well because it sounds amazing.
It's a fast read, and I don't feel like I can often say Stephen Graham Jones is a fast read for me. It's a fast read, and it's fully the horror movie vibes. It also, I think, around the same time, last year in 2024, horror movie came out by Paul Tremblay, and I think it's kind of like a nice pairing. Not that they're by any means similar, but that if you are a horror movie fan, I think one gives you, oh, I'm the slasher film fan, and the other gives you the Ring, Grudge, Halloween kind of coverage. So if that's your kind of like taste, I think you could throw that one into. Ooh, I snuck in a wreck. Look at me go. Jananie, what's your next pick?
Okay, I think this one is my most traditional horror book that I have, but like again, it's very literary because, I'm a huge literary fiction reader and I just love that kind of book. So, I have Natural Beauty by Ling Ling Huang. I love Ling Ling Huang's books, including her newer one, Immaculate Conception, which is also, I mean, it feels a bit more sci-fi, but it could also be horrific in the things that it examines. But Natural Beauty is like super, super weird. It follows this young woman who is a piano prodigy who kind of finds her life not turning out the way that she expected. And she's invited to start working at this kind of beauty store, skincare store that feels very like culty in the sense that like it's all about this weird, all organic, whole holistic health and skincare, routines. And so the main character, along with the other people working at the store, start to, use some of the products from the store and start to find them their beauty, their bodies, their lives sort of changing in strange ways. And this was a book that had some really interesting like queer undertones to it as well. But it also has like an off the rails like ending and like really creepy sort of realization as to what's happening um with this, store and with what the characters are going through and how they're transforming. And so I really loved it in that way. And I think it overall makes a really interesting commentary on the beauty industry and like our strive for beauty and our attempts at transforming ourselves to fit a certain expectation. Um, and yeah, it was also like really heartbreaking and has like some crazy things going on by the end. So yeah, loved it.
I remember there was a scene in that book. There was something to do with an eyelashes or an eyelid or some kind of
Oh,
eyeball scene
yes.
that messed me up so bad.
Yes. Yes,
I
I
can't
remember
remember
people
exactly what
talking
it was,
about
but it was
that.
good.
No, you're right. It was something with an eyeball, but, like, I do not flinch for that type of horror, but I know a lot of people were, like,
Mm.
freaked out by that.
I also love this pick because it's the again, like, your comparison to the literary style. I think of the, like, what's the horror adjacent line? I think of, like, Night Bitch. I think of this kind of, like, what is the this is starting normal and it amps up somewhere else without necessarily some of the camp, general sense camp, maybe not so ham-handed camp, but, like, even the general camp that we expect to see in horror or the tropes. But this book absolutely does the, like, it's normal until it isn't.
Yeah, it's like a very sort of sinister level of suspense that like draws you through the book until the end. So like it starts normal, like you said. And I feel like that's also how I kind of went into it because I had
Mhm.
heard it was a horror novel, but then I started and I was like, oh, this seems normal. Like this seems like something I would usually read. And I kept going and I was like, oh, this is getting freaky and creepy and I love this. So it was great.
Totally random comparison, but that reminds me of when I first read Diavola, which was one of my favorites at the time. We had recorded episodes like back to back, and one was like haunted house kind of style. And the next day we did like vampire reads. And I kept thinking Diavola was on the vampire reads episode, but either way I was sold. So the whole time I'm sitting there like, when do the vampires come in? And I just went, oh, wrong day. But ooh, oh man, I'm gonna have to put that one on the list. I snuck in Diavola. Sorry, y'all. Kayla, what's your next pick?
I really love that we are talking about new releases because there's obviously so much to be said for classic horror, for the things that have really stood the test of time. But I also just feel like horror is in such a fantastic place right now in publishing. And there are so many voices we've never heard from and so many like story types that have never been done before. So I love that we brought some new things to the table. If my first recommendation was for people who are newer to the genre, this one is for people who are deeply into horror and they want something they've never quite read before. And that's When the Wolf Comes Home by Nat Cassidy. This is a brand new release. It is the like must read horror of the year, in my opinion. I think you need to get into it before it gets spoiled for you because there's something this book is doing that's just really interesting. The initial pitch is there's a woman down on her luck through a variety of circumstances. She comes upon this young boy, and his dad slash maybe some sort of beast creature wolf is chasing after him. So now that they're strangers and they're on the run together. It's really fast paced. And once you understand like what's actually going on, it's hard to discuss the plot from there. It's kind of fairy tale esque. It's another campy one. That's something that I like. It's ridiculous for sure. And it's also deeply about fear and grief. And it really plays with your emotions. So that's what I would recommend. But also, okay, here's my little bonus one. Just because I'm talking about Nat Cassidy, if you haven't read Rest Stop, this is one of the most like disturbing, weird little novellas where a character is like at a gas station and they get locked in a really nasty bathroom. So Nat Cassidy is doing disgusting, but also doing like really thoughtful stuff. And I think this is an author we definitely need to watch.
We caught my like rudest moment in 4K because as you're like, this is the must read, I immediately grabbed my phone. I'm like, well, I guess I'm placing hold right now. You've already convinced me. And then as I'm listening to him, like, yeah, nope, I need to read this
You do.
stat. But sorry, y'all. I was looking at my phone because I was placing a hold.
It's definitely going to be one that I think is going to be pretty high up in like the Goodreads Choice Awards at the end of the year. So if you're somebody who likes to read like the popular stuff that everyone's talking about, I really think this is a good one.
This is where it's at. Now, Kayla, I want to bring it back to what you said as far as there are the classics that stand the test of time. The gorgeous Stephen King that you held up, like what a cover and what a like of the time look too. I'm like, oh yeah, me as a kid, I would have snatched that right up too. Put a sun and moon on the cover, I'm sold. What makes you feel so compelled by like we are in the height? Because I agree wholly. This is just us talking about it more. What makes you feel that we are in the height of horror right now?
Well, I don't want to take away from anyone else who could more, accurately speak on like the voices that have been, missing from literature over decades. So I think from the perspective of like what we're exploring in horror is what is most compelling to me right now. I don't think horror necessarily has to mean being scared as the reader. And that's kind of a box that horror was in for a long time. It's not just about characters encountering disgusting things. Like some horror is just sitting with a character deep in their grief or encountering the horrors of society or like discrimination. That is a horror in itself. But then horror can also be cozy. Like we're cozy horror is a thing right now. Horror romance is a thing right now. And I just think that it's fun to explore all of these different subgenres. And I genuinely think that there is something for everyone within horror. And the fact that it no longer fits into such a specific box, or even if people were doing more experimental things with horror throughout the decades, I don't think those ones were as widely talked about, maybe. And when people were looking for horror, it was just like, what's going to scare me? What's going to freak me out? And there's so much more in it.
Perfectly put, as far as like, right, I'm not the one to speak on it. But again, like seeing different topics talked about, but also there finally seems to be an acceptance of horror as a standalone genre. It is no longer just like the new Stephen King release. It is no longer just the like, like the whatever version of Frankenstein or a reiteration of an old story. And now we are seeing subgenres and right, it's about tackling grief. Like I think of How to Sell a Haunted House, Grady Hendrix. Like
Mm.
that's just a story about grief and the fact that you can find that, or like Rachel Harrison, who's in the top half of this episode, who covers everything from like her debut where you're looking at like some of the scariest anxiety ridden moments to cackle, which not necessarily horror on that realm, but could be in a certain lens. So I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, I totally agree as well. Because I think as like someone who's new to horror, I remember growing up and being like, horror is Stephen King, like that's it, and that felt so inaccessible to me and so unrelatable to me as well. Like just like as a person of color, just like having different experiences growing up. And so as I grew older and found different works of horror that kind of delved into like how horrific, like you were saying, discrimination is, or like other aspects of our regular life that are actually quite horrific, and how like those get extended into, the metaphors within the horror genre. That was fascinating to me. So yeah, I feel like it's definitely exploded into this really fascinating thing with so many subgenres, like you were saying, Kayla, of just being able to explore all of these themes.
1,000%. And I love that since we're watching it grow, we get to see the form change. I think before, like, I think it still stands that for most people, romance has to have a happily ever after. And a lot of times for people, horror had to have a supernatural element. And I love that while, yes, there is still a lot of like monstrosity and, like allegories via some form of supernatural, I love that the like thriller, psychological thriller side of writing has also crept into horror and been like, the horror can just be a man. Like the horror can just
Yeah.
in that like half of my my text messages, the horror can just be a man.
Or the horror can be completely unexplained. Like that's what I
Yes.
love that we're letting
Yes.
horror do right now. Is like
No
before it was
neat
like there's
bow.
right there's a haunted house. It has to be a ghost. We need to answer the question at the end of the book. Sometimes there is no answer and people are just scared and like there's just something ominous that was happening and you never actually get the answer. And I love that that's a thing. And I think as a horror reader, there are so many different like channels out there for people to tune into, and everyone in horror is reading such different stuff. Like people don't come to my channel looking for the extreme horror recommendations. It's not like the guts and sex and rock and roll. Like that's not what I do. I lean into the stuff that like I don't understand and also the characters don't understand. Maybe the author doesn't even understand.
But that's so true. The lack of a beautiful definition, the lack of knowledge, it's so nice to be back into something where my mind gets to do a little bit of the work. There is
Mhm.
not just the clean wrap up of we exercised the spirit and the house is ready to go to market. Like we can still have an ending where like we made it out okay. I'm not against that, but you also just get to be like, and we never figured out why. Like that's great. It's so fun.
Yeah, when I go to a Goodreads page and I see it with a really low average rating, I'm like, I know this is for me because it probably has an ending like that.
so real. So real because it's always the like, oh, I rated this 1 star because I just don't get what happened. And I go, well,
Mhm.
I'm locked in.
Yeah.
I'm ready. This was written for me. Would either of you happen to be opposed to another pick? Do either of you have another book in
I already
mind?
have one ready.
Go for it.
So I mean, we've been talking about sort of real world horrors, and there's also like historical horrors as well that I think can come into play. And I'm also a huge Gothic horror fan, so I have to recommend Mexican Gothic. I love Sylvia Moreno Garcia. First of all, as a author, as a writer, she has such range to her books, and they span across, Gothic horror to more thriller, suspense, mystery. She's also got like a vampire novel. She's got so much great stuff. But this is always one of my favorites, just because it does the Gothic element so well. We essentially follow our main character who gets a letter from her cousin who has recently gotten married. And this is set in the past. I'm forgetting what year, but it's set in the Mexican countryside. And her cousin is married to sort of this, English nobleman or, high class man of the English. And they have a house or this like manor house in the Mexican countryside. And so she receives this letter from her cousin who's like, there's strange things going on. There's people walking through walls of this house. My husband's family is acting strange. And it's all like red flags. So our main character decides to go stay with her cousin at this house and sort of investigate what's going on. And she is confronted with the suspense and mystery of this house, but also the people who live there. And this was such a well done, Gothic horror. It has a haunted house vibe to it, but it also has incredible social commentary and especially like historical commentary, and it dives into eugenics. And I just thought it was so well done. And you have, the flip and the mystery as you go along. It definitely goes a bit off the rails towards the end, which I love. And overall it was incredible at delivering that atmospheric Gothic threatening vibe. And I think as a person of color, like this gave me like Get Out vibes in some sense, like, you're entering the space that is not going to welcome you, and how horrific that can be, which I loved. So that's my pick.
I also, can you just hold that up to the camera again,
It's
but
so
sideways?
gorgeous.
Let's see those tabs.
Oh,
That's the first
yes.
thing I clocked when you held it up. Hey, Jananie,
Yes,
did you
yes.
do this for
I was
book
like,
club? Was this just things that stood out to you? The
I
interviewer in
don't
me is very
remember.
curious.
I think I read this during like a time when I was like tabbing a lot of my books. So this is one of the ones. I don't remember if I read it for a book club, but I think I just read so many lines that I was like, ooh, yes. Or I was coming across little tidbits of information, which Sylvia Moreno Garcia does a really interesting job of adding tidbits of information that you're like, oh, I want to read up on this later. So there was a lot of that as well. So yes, and this it's set in 1950s Mexico,
Oh,
if anyone was wondering about the time period. But yeah.
such a beautiful cover. Love seeing all of your tabs.
I think that one really helped kick off like fungal horror too, because
Ooh,
I remember
yes.
after reading that, there was like all of these announcements for other like weird mushroom growth
Mhm.
Appalachian stuff. And that's like there's a lot of like fungal swampy stuff that came after that.
Yeah,
And I feel like it
which I
helped.
love. Yeah.
But you're so right. Like 6 months later, all the emails coming through that are like, look out for this book, comps, Mexican Gothic. And you're like,
Hmm.
Yeah.
okay, new trend is here. Kayla, do you have a third?
No, don't put me on the spot.
I won't put you on the spot, but you are always the one to sneak in
I
a
know, but I
bonus
didn't want to
book.
come with too many because I was
I
like, if I
know.
start talking, I'll never shut up about it. That's why
Well,
I brought my little novella
I love
because
it.
I figured if people want something profoundly devastating and nasty as hell, Eric LaRocca. Okay, there's a little spin-off recommendation, just Eric LaRocca in general. If you want some nasty horror that explores just disgusting relationships between people. I don't think I have one specific one to recommend because things have gotten worse since we last spoke. I was into, but I know that one has not gone over well with a lot of people. But yeah, maybe that's my extra one. It's just two people and their correspondence, and they get each other to do really questionable things.
I love it. Well, one very important final question for the two of you. What's your favorite scary movie? You don't have to all jump out at once,
I
but
think it's I think it's I think it's Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I don't know if on the spot I could really pitch it perfectly, but I remember that was a really scary one for me. I remember specifically hiding under my coffee table while my parents were on the couch watching it, and I didn't want them to know I was scared or they wouldn't let me keep watching horror movies. So I was hiding under the table watching it, just being like shaking with fear.
Oh my God, I love
I
that.
did too.
So I'm not the biggest horror movie fan actually,
Just into the book so
because
far.
well, so I would say like the horror movies that I'm into are not the ones that it's like, ooh, jump scare or like unexplained horrific thing. It's usually the ones that have some sort of like social commentary and like the answer ends up being like racism and it's like awful and scary. So like Get Out or Sinners, I really loved recently. Just absolutely amazing. And I definitely was like jumping up, screaming, and like freaking out for the characters. And I also love that it was like set over this, short period of time. So it's like even more intense. But yeah, I definitely lean towards the ones that have like the suspense and like that fear for the characters.
Oh, absolutely. Now, if I had to go Kayla's route of like what has me hiding and like crying under a coffee table, I think the movie that has shook me from the moment I saw it was the original Strangers. That
I was gonna say, I hope you share your favorite because I need to know what did it
well,
for you.
well, in terms of like the movie that scares me the most, I don't even know if I could watch that movie again. The older I get, the worse I get. If I had to pick a recent, I just watched Weapons last weekend, and that was so silly. Who doesn't love some camp? Uh, but in terms of a favorite horror, oh, I asked this question. I don't have because what an awful question to ask people. Um, I think if I had to say franchise, I'd say Scream because who doesn't love the like poke fun at satire? Yeah, I don't know.
That one really changed the game
It
for sure.
did. It did. And I'm just old enough that I think I was alive when they were all coming out. I don't remember. I don't remember when those movies came out. I was definitely alive. I'm 30. I'm almost 33. I was alive. Well, thank you both so much for joining me today and sharing some incredible picks. Anything either of you want to like plug before we see you again? I think next week.
Well, thank you for having us. This
Oh
was
yeah,
lovely.
I'm so
absolutely.
happy to be here.
Yay. Well, I'm so happy to have you both. And now we are going to transition to the next group of book racks. Well, welcome. I refuse to not have the maximum amount of horror recommendations possible because these are my favorite type of reads. It is my favorite type of season, if you couldn't tell from around me. We need some camp. We need some delight. Bree's all dressed up. She's got her Black Oween on. So speaking of that, welcome to Amy. Welcome to Bree. Do you both want to take a moment, say hi, tell the people where to find you? Of course, everything's linked in the description, but
Yeah,
welcome.
hi. I'm Amy Ellen Clark, and I host the Book Gang podcast that celebrates debuts, backlist books, and under the radar book gems. So you can find me on that podcast. And I'm pretty much mom advice everywhere else because that's how I started my site.
Love it.
I'm Bree. I am Lock Fictitious on all platforms except on Instagram. It's Lock underscore Booktition underscore. But everywhere else, you can just find me. That's Lock Fictitious. So primarily, what I do is you can just see here. It's like a little bookmark.
I love
Oops,
the
I don't
art.
know what's happening. It's moving. But this is I call her Black Queen. She is something that one of my artist friends, Harley, created for me as an image of me to celebrate Black Halloween, which happens every year. It's not happening this year due to personal conflicts, but people are still participating. So you can still go on my YouTube channel. The Discord is still open. If you go to my most recent Black Halloween announcement, which happened last year, you can find all the links that you would need to participate. But Black Halloween is a celebration of Black authors who write spooky stuff. We're talking crime fiction, we're talking mystery, thriller, horror, cozy mysteries, paranormal, like things like that. There is a location in Black Halloween, though, honoring my mom, which is like spooky romance because my
Mm.
mom passed. And then there's also a location um, in the world of Black Halloween called Joe's Library, where you can read spooky books as well. But also, I want you to read Indigenous books because I think it's really important that we have that camaraderie between Indigenous and Black people when we talk about shared history and everything that has happened through colonialization. So I think that's really it for me. And I read spooky stuff. I read nonfiction. I read a lot of stuff, but I try to keep
Mhm.
it stab, stab, murder, murder. For being real.
And you are also my go-to manga girl when I'm like,
Yes.
who's gonna talk it up with me? I know Bree will.
I will.
I I have no doubt. I'm gonna kick us off because I am currently loving Let Me in Your Window by Adam Ellis. He is a former BuzzFeeder. He is a cartoonist, an artist. You've definitely seen him online. He does amazing and hilarious illustrations on his Instagram. And this is the sequel to his New York Times bestselling Bad Dreams in the Night, which is packed with terrifying twists, haunted houses, urban legends, and delightfully horrifying stories like your own personal campfire ghost stories packed into a graphic novel. Each story will make you scream for more. Bad Dreams in the Night was fantastic. He did his take on The Girl with the Green Ribbon, including in the physical version, there was a built in bookmark. And of course, it was a green ribbon. But this brand new collection of delightful horror comics includes 10 new thrilling and terrifying stories that will keep readers on the edge of their seats and peering out their windows in fright. Adam Ellis, one of the biggest stars in webcomics, brings his unique blend of humor and horror to life with stunning illustrations and gripping narratives. Stories include Sleepwalker, about a terrifying and unexplained incident at a youth hostel, Old Machines, about receiving instant messages from a friend who has been dead for years, and Sunken Express, which chronicles a paranormal journey on a phantom subway car. Whether it's a ghostly encounter, a creepy urban legend, or a supernatural mystery, Let Me in Your Window is guaranteed to give you the creeps. So, yeah, I really
Yeah.
like his art style.
Yeah.
And it's like it's fun, it's colorful. His art style is very rounded, which I don't know, like my brain appreciates that a lot. So it all seems like very bright and hopeful, but then he has the power to just come up with some of the darkest tales. Like it truly, both of these books very much give to me like scary stories to tell in the dark. So it revives that part of me that makes me go, oh, okay, this fits right in. So yeah,
Okay. Makes sense.
yeah,
I want to talk about, and I'm just going first, sorry, because I have
go for it.
2%, and I was like 2% on my phone, and I'm like, I gotta get this out. Okay, so this past weekend, I was honored to attend a book convention called the Black Book Bash, a literary family reunion. That's what it's titled. And it was all Black authors coming together, spanning all genres, talking about what they do best, which is write awesome things. I had the time of my life. I was able to meet everyone but two of my favorite Black horror writers, and I couldn't believe even they recognized me. So I was like
Mm.
fangirling the whole time. However, there's one new author who I really want to get into her stuff. We were joking, we were laughing. She's super personable. I just love her story, and her name is Octavia Grant, and she has this book called Cutthroat, and it is a it's like a thriller horror. It's kind of what it is. And this book is about Eden Sheldon, who is a woman who discovers her seemingly perfect husband has devastating secrets, leading her down to a path of revenge. and psychological warfare. It has themes of betrayal, infidelity, a woman's scorn, and just like all these things that people would think is just like things that people just regularly go through, but just make it terrifying to read. So I am super excited to get into that book. Unfortunately, I was late to the signing on getting that book. It like sold out quick at her thing, but I do have it on ebook, and I think you can find it on Hoopla. So definitely look into that. Don't quote me on the Hoopla though, but but you can find some other books of her on Hoopla.
I love it. What speaks to me about Black Oween, what speaks to me about like your picks always is that you don't get stuck in the silo of like there is so much to explore. There is crime.
Mhm.
There is like the psychological thriller. Everything is always there. And I'm so grateful because it's so easy when you're like sitting there making a list and you're putting everything together to go like, I have to get super narrow and super focused on something. And I'm always appreciative when it's like, oh, just kick down the door because
Yeah,
everything that could possibly count counts.
yeah, yeah.
And also, who doesn't love finding a new author to just be like, well, you might be my
Right,
new obsession.
right. So I'll let Octavia Grant. She's good.
We will be.
We love all
Amy,
the Octavias, honestly.
mhm.
What a great name.
Right?
I
I'm
mean,
like,
that's a legendary name for sure.
right.
Legendary for sure. Yeah.
Well, Amy, what do you have first?
So I am bringing one that I'm excited about and one that I did read. And the first one I'll talk about is the one that I absolutely loved. It is called One Yellow Eye by Lee Radford. Have you heard about this one, Joe?
I don't think so.
Okay. Yay. Okay. All right. So basically, my favorite kind of horror is grief horror. I feel like every year I pick one book, and that tends to be the theme of it. This one unfolds after a zombie pandemic, but it is definitely less horror and more like a meditation on loss, on marriage, and what we would do to keep someone with us forever. So in this story, we have a wife who is basically we are introduced to her at the very top of what we consider her grief story. She is going to a support group for people who also have been left behind during this pandemic. And then she goes to her job as a scientist and she is trying to uncover like what happened. How did this pandemic happen? And then the evening is spent going to a dinner to basically celebrate her late husband on his birthday, and she's sharing a dinner with her best friend, and her best friend's just speaking platitudes to her grief and not really like getting like the depth of what is going on. And so when she gets home, that is when we first uncover some new clues to what her daily life is really like, because the entire interior of her home is riddled with medical equipment and lots of unusual things that are lurking in every corner. And she goes into the kitchen and puts a candle in the cake and hands it to her husband. Now, I don't want to say too much more beyond that, but really the big theme in this is what would we do to hang on to someone even when we shouldn't? And what unfolds is just really just a stunning story. I was in tears at the end of this book because it moved me so much emotionally. And it's always surprising, I think, especially in zombie apocalypse stories, the different ways that that can all play out, whether it's funny, like, what is it, Hollow Kingdom? Like that one just made me laugh hysterically, or it's something more, sinister, or even something more sorrowful. And that's really what happens in this story. It is a debut, and I absolutely loved it. Could not put it down. It's going to be our pick for spooky season for our book club next year because I have to talk to somebody about this book.
Absolutely. That sounds incredible. I mean, how often is like zombie as genre just a different version of post-apocalyptic? That to me is such a better meditation on the genre, because I'm usually not hooked by anything zombie. It's not usually anything I lean toward,
Yeah.
but that I would absolutely read. Like grief always hits hard in horror. I only do a handful at
Hmm.
a time because oh boy. I think
Wow.
horror unlocks so many emotions, unlike any other genre. And I feel like if you are not reading horror, it is not what you think it is. There is plenty of what you think it is out there. Like you can go and pick up the what is his name? Ketchum, I think. You can pick up just the straight up like gross, nasty,
Mhm.
whatever slasher, whatever you want to pick. You can see what you see in the movie, but you can also just be like, oh, this is just a different interpretation of like literary fiction. This is forcing you to come to terms with and feel the weight of. And scientist in a pandemic
Yeah.
sounds like a dangerous combo.
There's
Yeah.
something about this that actually reminded me of Shark Heart, which I know sounds really out there as far as this goes, but it was so fantastical about the portrait of marriage and caretaking long after we should maybe be doing so in certain cases.
Yeah.
And it also overlaps really nicely with Monstrilio. So if for those horror readers that have read that, it's very, very similar with the bones of it. And yeah, she has, I think, a TV or movie writing background. It has a very cinematic quality to the writing. I can
Interesting.
absolutely see this coming to some type of film.
I love that. Bree, do you want to hit us with your next one?
Yeah, I hope I'm not re-saying I didn't put the same book. Now I'm feeling nervous.
I don't. The only one that I think you have talked about before on your list is the Buffalo Hunter.
Oh, well, I cannot
But
that because I've
I
talked.
feel like everything else I don't recognize. So
Okay, so we
you're
won't talk
good.
Buffalo Hunters. A link will be somewhere for you to see me talking about that one.
Correct.
Okay.
Somewhere on the screen, I'll figure out how to put those little cards in, and it'll say, "Bree talked about it here."
Yeah, I was like, did I talk about? I couldn't
Just
remember.
that one.
Okay. So the other book, which I thought I had a physical copy, but I also feel like somebody stole my books because there's like 2 or 3 book like boxes I haven't unpacked. Anyway, nobody asked for that, but I gave it. So we're gonna talk about this cursed house. But before we talk about the book, we're gonna talk about the author, Dell Sandine. This was her debut novel. I was fortunate enough to meet her at the Black Book Bash. She is a delight. Awesome. Just a wonderful human being who really care about the betterment of Black folks. Like she is for us. And when I first met her, I came out of one of the panels and I saw her standing and I just made a beeline to her and I was like, Dale Sandine? And she was like, yeah. She was so personable. I gave her some Black Queen stickers. And she actually reached out to me today because I didn't have my physical copy of my book when I met her to sign it. And she's personalizing one and sending it to me. So that was a flex if y'all didn't know what that was.
I
Okay.
picked
I
I
hear
picked
you.
up on that
That,
one.
that was a flex.
I hear you.
Anyhow, this cursed house really examines colorism in a way that needs to be highlighted within Black communities in the sense of it's like, we have people who are more white presenting, people who are more maybe caramel skin, people are more my skin color, people are more darker. And because of white supremacy and what it has done to our communities, it fractures. People respond differently depending on how you look. And that's just how it is in a lot of places in the world. And this book follows this young woman who is really unsure where she came from and really is curious about where her mother came from. And I think she mysteriously gets like an invitation to this job in Louisiana. And she goes there and realize that she is in a way related to the people in this house. However, they think that she can break a curse that was set on them a long time ago. And the curse really is where we dive deep into the different aspects of colorism and how it feels. And what I thought Dell did a fantastic job is make the protagonist, the main character, a dark skinned Black woman. And then everybody else in the house is damn near looking like Joe. Just light. Uh,
I'm glad you said Joe and not me.
Little old
I'm
pale
also
old
an easy
me
target.
in 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 my hocus pocus looking
It
shirt.
listen, they are very light,
Yeah.
but it's also it's just so many dichotomies happening in the book, also examining like, am I black enough? And what that looks like. And because I have, black ancestry, am I honoring black people in the way that it should be? It's kind of like when I think about my indigenous ancestry, am I cosplaying it, or am I showing up authentically and letting you know that indigenous people matter, deserve love, deserve sovereignty, and deserve their language to be and culture to be intact. So I think while reading this book, you're going to go on a wild ride of kind of investigating her family's origin and the way that she is, while also having to deal with family members who look like the white man and they don't like you, or they're pretending that they like you because they think that you can break this curse. So it's like, I'm going to pretend that I'm down for you, but it's more of a transactional, right? It's more of a transactional relationship, which I think was really the star of it. Like the characters was written very well. I felt like the plot moved well. There were some parts where you got like a breath of information. And I remember reading it and being like, I need all of that. And then sitting with it, I was like, no, I need it all. So that's kind of how I can explain this cursed house. And it's a magical system that's present as well. There's some ancestral teachings that we need to pay attention to as well. Are we listening to our ancestors? Or are we thinking that we can do it on our own kind of thing? So I really enjoyed this cursed house. And shout out to you, Del Sandine, for writing such a great novel that really pivots into or give you a window into how colorism is being expressed and was expressed in Black communities.
This sounds fantastic.
It does. I was gonna say thank you for sharing that because, like, again, this is absolutely something I want to pick up because I am the glow in the dark amount of white. I want to understand as much as I can. I want to have my empathy as strong as I can get it, but also like I always like Amy talking about grief and thinking about this with colorism within a community. It's the like we all when we find ourselves in communities, when we find ourselves in minorities, we always seem to end up there is that bit of fighting within ourselves that also holds us back. And I think
Yeah.
there is so much in that that I will see and relate to from like the queer perspective and
Yeah.
yeah, but
Yeah.
also a magic system. Like I
Yeah.
guess so I can get so much out of one book. Like,
Mhm.
Yeah. And
okay.
there's also a thread, and I think I saw it the most because I just lost my mom. It's like, what do you
Mhm.
do when you've never met her? You don't know her. These
Yeah.
people are connected to her, and you're trying to stay connected to her because of these people, but they are anti-black as fuck.
Yeah.
And it's like, how do you, as a dark skinned woman, navigate the world where you might not even gonna say you might. I've often have experienced things like this, that lateral violence, right? So
Mhm.
it's just like, how do you navigate that when people that look like you is being anti-black and they're not being honest about the family history, and now putting me in situations where it's dangerous and I don't know who to turn to,
Right.
Mhm.
right? It also talks about like, some Southern secrets that I don't want to, I think I'll spoil it, but there's like things that happen in Southern communities
Mhm.
that you're like, really, your cousin, So it's
Right.
like,
Right.
it's so many layers to the book. She's definitely writing another book, and I'm excited about that one too. So when that one come out, you'll hear me screaming about it too. But
We know where to go for the official review.
yes, it will be me on the internet.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is so powerful. And ooh, mm-mm-mm. This is a big guilty episode for me because all I'm doing is just I'm Thanos right now. I'm collecting all the stones. I'm like, okay, well, I'm trying to compile the best TBR I can for myself.
As you should.
And if other people can benefit from it, great. But at the very least, by the end of this, I will be very pleased. Amy, this is now the book that you are excited for?
Yes.
Cool.
So I was planning to bring All's Well by Mona Awad because this is like one of my favorite horror books. And if you haven't read that one, it is basically about a woman with chronic pain who is not believed. And then she sets off on a curse on the people around her who have not believed her. And all sorts of diabolical things end up happening, as Mona's books tend to do. But I got a message from my reader, Sidra, who told me that there was a book coming out next week that she thought was right up my alley. And it is almost identical in overlapping themes with like a very fun haunted house spin. It's called The Scald Crow by Grace Daly. And Daly is a disabled author. She says that she has multiple invisible chronic illnesses. What is strange is that I have a condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and one of those characteristics of us is that we kind of all look like siblings. And when I saw her author photo, I was like, she looks a little bit like me. And I sent her a message and said, I have EDS. And she was like, that's what I have. And I was like, okay. So all that is to say is there is kind of that connection as well. But the novel itself is from a publishing house that I'm unfamiliar with called Creature Publishing. And I mention it because it specializes in feminist horror and women-driven thrillers. So in the synopsis, it shares that's shot through with gallows humor and speaking in the voice of a trusted best friend. This self-deprecating horror novel explores medical trauma through Irish folklore, asking, can a sick woman ever be trusted? So the main character basically has lost her job thanks to chronic pelvic pain with no identifiable cause. And as a self-doubting disabled adult, she's certain that everything that has happened to her is her fault. And when her mother goes missing, she ends up returning to her childhood home where a particular crow that once harassed her reappears following her everywhere. And then it says a painting of Jesus keeps coming back, no matter how many times she throws it away, and frozen body parts start showing up in odd places in the home. And as objects begin to come to life, she thinks, is this also all in my head? So to survive it, she'll need to ignore what her mother and her chronic pain doctors have always told her, that her perception of reality can't be trusted. So I am really, really excited about this. I think, obviously medical trauma is just ripe for all sorts of horror stories. All women have these kinds of stories that are told in doctors' offices and not being believed and, being talked down to or told that you have, some kind of mental illness when you are dealing with chronic pain. And I can see the seeds of this story being really, really impactful for people in the disabled community, especially who navigate that every day. I find stories like these, honestly, getting a little revenge through books, quite therapeutic.
I cannot blame you. I mean, when you and I have talked about like just an ounce of what you've been through, I go, well, yeah, of course you need revenge in
Yeah.
in the form of books because Amy, please, I need you here. So don't do any real revenge.
Yes, yes, I will keep it in my books. It will all
Yeah.
be fiction. If
Yes.
something terrible happens, it's not for me, for sure.
It's not from you.
You gotta
But
know
it's
that, Joe.
yeah, right. There's just something. There is something about it. It is you never know what you're gonna get when you walk into a doctor's office.
Yes.
Oh, I hate doctors.
Not my favorite either. I'm fat, so I don't even
Yeah,
need to go. That's my answer. Like,
yeah.
have you tried losing 800 pounds and then maybe all of your problems will go away?
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
well, I had this problem when I was skinny, so
Yeah.
That's my thing. I have arthritis in my knees, and they're like, "Well, you're like 260," and I'm like, "Yeah," and I'm 6'1". So
right.
I think my joints would just hurt, like, and it's hereditary.
For
And
sure.
then they say dumb shit like, "Oh,
Mhm.
well, if you lose some weight," and I'm like, "When I was skinny as hell, I still have the same issue. So skinny, medium, bigum, I'm still in
Exactly.
pain."
And what's the plan here and now? Like,
Right.
you can tell me that all you want, but how are we gonna get through today?
Exactly.
Mm-mm. I
Just
love
not.
it. It's my favorite. Doctors are the best. Modern
Mhm.
medicine cures every problem I've ever had.
Yay.
I mean, this book really does overlap with a lot of books that are, I think, coming out right now. There's another book called The Mad Wife that isn't necessarily horror slanted, but it's basically about how women were diagnosed as hysterical, in the 1950s and, the lobotomies and the things that they would do to women to change them because they believed that a lot of the experiences that they were having were related to that. And so I just see that sitting in that same wheelhouse because it is, just like all things I feel like that we explore in horror, there's some degree of something that we all can relate to. And even when, decades have passed or centuries have passed, there are still those residual effects. And, women are still being diagnosed as hysterical and, you know, being denied their experiences of chronic pain and told to, take other kinds of measures rather than actually getting the treatment they need. And so I love how this is playing in that same wheelhouse, whether, you can explore that in lots of different genres. But for sure, I think those two books sit really nicely under that theme.
And I think this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where I said Bree knows how to kick down the door and say, "No, this fits." It's the same thing. Like, I love that horror no longer has to be there's a supernatural element, and that
Yeah.
any of these books should be classified as horror, even though they are real, even though they are grounded in reality. Like,
Oh, yeah.
the things
Yeah.
that women have gone through, especially like Black women in the healthcare
Hmm.
system, that's horror. It doesn't have to be false to still be horror.
Mhm.
I, on a very big pivot,
Mhm.
want to use today as a chance for me to bring up a book I didn't think I'd ever really get the chance to bring up on the show because
Ooh.
it's from 2005. Like, I usually
Ooh.
try to stay pretty recent, but this is Haunted by Chuck Palahniuk. You likely know it if you know already. It is a horror collection of short stories. Haunted is a novel made up of 23 horrifying, hilarious, and stomach churning stories. They're told by people who have answered an ad for a writer's retreat and unwittingly joined a survivor like scenario where the host withholds heat, power, and food. As the storytellers grow more desperate, their tales become more extreme and ruthlessly plot to make themselves the hero of the reality show that will surely be made from their plight. This is one of the most disturbing and outrageous books you'll ever read, one that could only come from the mind of Chuck Palahniuk.
How have I
Mm.
never heard of this?
This is one of the ones that, like, even at the time was just like it was like hidden, not hidden in the stacks, but it was just like put in there next to all of his other stuff, and everyone was going for Rant and Fight Club and Damned. But this is the one I remember picking up, in high school at the library and just going through and like it's a collection. It's so odd because, like, while it is a collection of short stories, it's not a collection of short stories. It is a novel told via short stories because there is a whole package around it as far as these kidnapped people, basically. Well, they're not kidnapped, they answered an ad, but effectively kidnapped writers, and then their stories are presented. And it has that blending of, are their stories manifest from something that happened to them? Are they, machinations of people who are like hunger starved? And
Mhm.
yeah, it's a weird one. And I was so like, y'all saw the doc. I had like six different titles in here, and I was just like, this is my chance. The time is now.
Hey, I'm here for backlists. Like,
Yeah.
I
bring
know you
it.
are.
Bring
I
it.
love
Bring
that.
it. I just discovered Jane Eyre like 2 weeks ago, and I'm like, do you guys
Oh.
know the good news about Jane Eyre? I'm just driving everyone crazy. They're like, we've already heard that story. Joe's already heard this story before.
I love it. I'm here for it.
Yeah.
Um,
Sure.
Bree, I believe you have one left. Do you want to
I
share your last
do.
one?
I do. So sorry. It's kind of a multi-part situation. So
Oh, take us through it.
yes. So the first part is I love Black horror. Anyone who know me knows that. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the queen, that is Jananie K, who really pioneered Black flora and really is like a literary giant to so many wonderful authors who write in the genre, Black authors who write in the genre, and also non-Black authors who write in the genre. There is also, even though I don't try to shop as much on Amazon, there is a book on Amazon called 160 Black Women in Horror. So if you're like, oh my God, I've never heard of Black women writing horror, this is your opportunity to go and get that book and read about 160 Black women who write horror. So that's my thing there. In addition to, I really just think Black horror is so unique in the way that, like Senator Do once coined the phrase, Black horror is Black history. And I feel like you got to keep that in mind when you're reading Black horror, because I think people want Black horror to look the way that white men write it. And it's different. And it's different in indigenous horror. It's different in Japanese horror. Like it's just different, you know? So I think you want to keep that in mind, that people collective history is going to be represented in the trauma that they write, because that shit is horrific. Slavery is horrific. Genocide is horrific. Like medical abuse is horrific. Like a lot of Indigenous and Black women have often talked about their experiences of being a lab rat or not being believed or thinking that their pain tolerance is non-existent.
Hmm.
So when Black women and Indigenous women and Japanese women and Latina women are talking about these things are actually horrific because people are dying. People's livelihood is on the line. So I just wanted to say that, because a lot of times when I'm reading his horror reviews from white folks, I'm gonna just keep it real, to Indigenous, Latina, and Black horror, the main thing people like to say is I can't relate. The main thing people like to say is this isn't the horror I experienced. And it's like, if you was to go up to someone and tell them I had trauma X and they tell you that wasn't a trauma, how would you feel? So I think you want to ask yourself that when you are examining whether or not you believe that something is horror. Now that I can get off of my soapbox, let's talk about the next book, Flowers of the Sea. Sorry. Flowers
No,
of the
that's the soapbox we have to be on because someone
Yeah.
has to say it.
Yeah.
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 I was screening for Black History Month for this month because we're trying to prep for next year. And,
Yeah.
I was also trying to read spooky books, but honestly, the Black history books that I read were the horror books, right? It is the lived experiences of Black people. And I just read Zeal by Morgan Jenkins, and it was a incredible novel, but it
Yeah.
was truly harrowing. It was heartbreaking, and my heart was pounding through so much of it. And, I felt like even though I wasn't intentionally seeking that in my reading stack, I was reading
Yeah.
for a different kind of experience. It
Mhm.
all overlaps and intertwines.
Yes. Exactly. Exactly. Um, the next author I want to talk about is Zen E. Rockland, and I'm gonna try not to get emotional. It's been it's been a long time that I've met an author who moved me in such a transformative way just by being who they are, being authentically themselves. This author is Black. She is also Trini, and she is just a phenomenal person who wrote this book called Flowers of the Sea. And I read it on the plane on my way to the Black Book Bash. And then I met her, talked to her, even talked to her about Blackaween. I asked her for an interview. She said yes. Then, if you're listening, I'm going to hold you to that. And she's just a phenomenal human being that I am over the moon, that I got the pleasure to even be in her presence. And her book really examines so many historical levels of hurt that Black people have experienced through chattel slavery and being enslaved in this country, and the country is the US. And it follows the story of this young woman named Roxy, and she's pregnant. And she is also actively in like I'm not a mom, hold on. Actively in labor. There we go. I was like, where's the word? Actively in labor, and she is having sex. She is really having sex in active labor. But the act of giving birth is scary. She really didn't want to be a mom, but everything is on her shoulders because she's on this boat of refugees of her people who, when people would get pregnant, the pregnancy would be terminated, or the kid wouldn't really be born. And she is the one that everyone is looking for as far as this hope of like, you're going to carry the next generation. It's going to be you. It's going to be you. So to me, it kind of mirrored that thing that a lot of people like to tell me, and I find offense. Sorry if this is your first time hearing it. You're a strong Black woman. Why do I need to be a strong Black woman all the goddamn time? Why can't I be soft? Why can't I be mad? Right? Why can't I be angry? Okay? Why do I always have to be the mammy? Why do I always have to be some kind of archetype of whatever you think a Black woman is? And I felt like the main character, Roxy, was constantly trying to, you know, fight against that bear, but also understanding the weight that is on her shoulders, right? And I just thought that this is a gothic horror, if anyone is into that as well. And it's a novella, and to be such a small book, it's so powerful. You find yourself just like on a roller coaster. It's like Zen really sat there and said, I'm gonna make sure every sentence of this book matter. I'm gonna make sure you understand the gravity of what has happened historically to my people, and how she chose to express that through the main character, Roxy. It talks about the themes of being a refugee, right? It talks about the themes of motherhood. It also talks about I think something that I even deal with of like when I tell people I am never bearing a crotch fruit. If you're new here and you don't know what a crotch fruit is, it's a child. I will not be bringing no kid into the world. However, Team Auntie, my nieces and nephews, y'all know who you are. Love you. But I'm gonna tell you right here, I'm not birthing nobody. But it's always a topic that gets you looks as a Black woman because they're like, what? Why aren't you having kids? Why aren't you doing this? And just to watch this woman have a kid, have some apparition about it, while also having to experience something so traumatic as giving a birth, right? Also experiencing the weight, like I said, of the people on this ship who look like her, putting the weight like you're gonna have the first child that's gonna come into the world. Also feeling like a disconnect with that child. So we got some postpartum issues kind of going in there, in addition to trying to fall in love with this white man who probably is not really trying to be that dude to you, right? Looking at you as a place of pleasure and not a place of foundation. So there's just so many levels to this book. I think there's so many themes. I just really I think that the best part about this book is how eerie and creepy it is from page one or chapter one to the end of the book. And again, it's short. I think the audiobook is like less than 3 hours, but it is so impactful. And I think it's a story that needs to be told. And if you are a fan of Rivers, was it River Solomon? I don't know if it was River Solomon or the guy. No, I can't remember the author of the book. I'm sorry. But if you are a fan of a book called The Deep, you will also be a fan of this book as well.
You're
Oh,
the queen of this
absolutely the queen
genre
of
for
this.
sure.
I love this genre a lot.
Ugh. And it shows, and we love it. Like, but Amy, Bre, thank you both so much for being here and sharing just incredible picks. I hope everyone's TBR is absolutely worn out right now from all of the picks. I know I couldn't be happier. I got everything I wanted. Tons of beautiful books to enjoy for the next couple weeks before I don't know. What do I usually transition to? I feel like after I do horror for a while, then I do like cold, wintry thrillers, which is just an extension of horror. So, this is just priming me for that.
Yeah, I love to do detective and do
Yes.
like some
Ooh,
historical fiction
you're
that's still
right.
spooky, but like in there, kind of like the Buffalo Hunters. It's a historical fiction horror, right? So I love those. I love to get another genre I really love to match my primary genre.
You're right. This
Yeah,
after I get through this, that's about when I hit the cozy mystery
yeah,
or like crime thriller
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
vibe.
yeah.
Oh,
If you're interested in crime thriller, sorry, not to be throwing in more.
please.
There's an author named Tracy Clark. I also met her at the Black Book Bash. She's prolific in what she does, and a lot of the books that she writes is and she's a black woman. A lot of what she writes is detective novels.
Oh, I love that.
Mhm.
I'm down to find a new my next new like detective novel pick. So,
Yeah.
Tracy, I'm headed your way.
Tracy. I took a
Tracy,
picture with her, took a picture with Dale, took a picture with Zen. Again, it's a flex.
and let him hear you flex.
Yeah.
Well, now we will transition to me probably in this outfit doing an outro. And so the tale comes to an end. But beware, the stories don't stop here. They lurk in your library, waiting, whispering, begging to be read. Many thanks to my guests today in segment one, Rachel Harrison and Ryan LaSala, for sharing their twisted treasures. Make sure you haunt their social media. Links to their websites are included in the show notes. And thank you to our Monster Mash segment two, jam-packed full of horror recommendations. You can find all of the titles recommended today in the show notes, and you can find a full list of titles associated with today's episode, aka all the books the authors have written, series lists mentioned in segment two, anything that Ryan and Rachel shouted out in segment one. In the show notes, or you can visit libbylife.com/book lounge and check out the post for today's episode. At the end of that post, it will have all of the books mentioned in today. And then, of course, our librarian friends can find those titles in Marketplace. The link to the Marketplace list with all of those titles is included in the episode description. Make sure you're subscribed and following the show. You won't want to miss next week where we move from creepy to cozy. Yes, next week we'll still be keeping the fall vibes rolling with cozy, witchy reads, cozy fantasy, witch stories, and the like. We've got amazing authors joining us to share their secrets and more book recommendations than you could shake a magic wand at. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to follow Book Lounge by Libby on your favorite podcast app and check out the Libby app YouTube channel for our video content. You can reach me via email. Send an email to bookloungebyLibby@overdrive.com, and you can find us on Instagram at libby.app. If you're loving the show, a quick rating or review on your favorite podcast platform will help other book lovers find us. Until our next gathering, remember, every good horror story starts when someone says, "I'll just read one more chapter." Happy reading! You can sample and borrow the books from today's episode in the Libby app, or if you're a librarian, find them for purchase in Overdrive Marketplace. Book Lounge by Libby is a proud Evergreen Podcast signature program. Explore more amazing shows at evergreenpodcasts.com. This podcast is produced and recorded by me, Joe Skelly, with editing by Andrew Alonso. Our theme music is High Five by Rex Banner, used with permission. Book Lounge by Libby is presented by the Libby app. Learn more at libbylife.com/booklounge.